Today I'll be going over part 2 of what if Izuku becomes a Spartan for the Hero Public Safety Commission. And all the credit goes to the author in the description below. Let us begin. And let's begin the story. Chapter 11, December 1st, 2167 035. Kenta thought of himself as a fairly straightforward henchman. He stood where he was told to stand, he fought when he was told to fight, and every once in a while, he'd spout a witty remark about how the heroes wouldn't get past him. He followed orders and got paid accordingly. They'd even given him a nice-looking parka that matched with the gang's color scheme. It was black with green accents, and it felt so nice during the winter months. All in all, he was content with how things were. His partner, on the other hand. Man, this is such bullshit. We should be out there, kicking ass and taking names. From what I hear, the Yakuza are a stiff breeze away from being blown out of the competition. Hell, if we could just muster up a few more boys, we could probably storm their headquarters tonight, Isamu ranted. His sister always had been the most energetic of the two. Guard duty had never suited her. It was the fast-paced, high-adrenaline situations like car chases, street fights, and turf wars that were her calling. Kenta wasn't sure whether her quirk itself had turned her into a thrill-seeker, or if she developed that behavior because she had the quirk to rely on. Either way, the enhanced strength allowed her to dominate in close quarters by simply throwing people around until they'd given up or died. Of course, being in the thick of it meant that she also took a beating more often than not, which was how they'd ended up on the guard detail for the gang's primary warehouse. Or, as Isamu liked to call it, babysitting duty. He acknowledges. Like, seriously, we could probably clear out the whole ward if we just got off our asses and went on the offensive for a change. You know what I mean? MMHM. Isamu goes quiet for a moment, turning to face her brother with a scowl on her face. Are you ignoring me? A minuscule grin creeps upon his lips as he simply responds with an, Thanks, asshole. Good to know you're always willing to lend an ear to your beloved big sister. Hey, actually, now that we're talking about it, I had this really neat idea. Basically, what we do is... A muffled yelp sounds off to his right, where Isamu is. Kenta's hand reaches for the pistol at his waist as he whirls around to see whatever it is that's cut his sister off. When his eyes make contact, however, he finds himself freezing in abject terror. A suit of armor, well over 2 meters tall, is right there. Right in front of him, not even a meter away. Kenta hadn't even heard it move. There wasn't a shuffle of boots across the ground or a pounding of feet as it got closer. The young goon honestly considers if maybe it had some sort of warp quirk. There was no other explanation for how something so huge could have gotten the jump on them. That's when Kenta realizes that it's got Isamu in its grasp. A single, massive gloved hand covers her entire face, preventing her from calling out for help. The other hand holds a syringe that's been stabbed into her neck. His older sister, who can lift cars and smash through brick walls, is helpless against this monster. It doesn't budge nor so much as flinch as she thrashes about, trying to free herself. Kenta snaps out of his petrified state and continues to move for his sidearm. Only, his arm doesn't budge. In fact, there's a painful, no, excruciating sensation coming from his wrist. He can actually feel his bones creaking as the pressure only increases. It's like they've been caught in an industrial press or are being crushed by a collapsing building. He has just enough time to peek out the corner of his eye to see a second armor-clad giant right up against him. One of its hands is firmly clasped around his wrist, likely the cause for the overwhelming agony. But the other hand has taken the form of a fist and is sailing straight towards his face. Kenta has but an instant to experience the sensation of his jaw being pulverized, with blood and saliva spewing forth from his lips. The pain ends as quickly as it had begun, and darkness consumes his vision immediately afterwards. Their first mission. After all the training, all the pain, all the loss, they finally get to carry out their first real mission as Spartans. There's only one word Izuku can use to describe this moment: delightful. Subduing the two guards had taken little effort. Their skills alone would have been enough, but combined with the active camouflage system that the SPI armor provided, and they'd all but vanished from the world. Izuku was honestly fascinated by his gear. More than 225 kilos of titanium, nanocrystals, and complex circuitry, yet his movements weren't hindered in the slightest. Not to mention all the guns, spare magazines, grenades, and other equipment he was carrying around. He could run, jump, and fight just as easily as if he was in a shirt and pair of shorts. Izuku removed the handgun from the unconscious goon's holster, ejected the magazine, and then snapped the pistol in half. He reached for one of his many pouches and pulled out a pair of quirk-suppressant handcuffs which he fastened to the wrist of the gang member. Across from him, Hitoshi was doing the same with the other guard while Mei and Will kept watch for them. Despite their active camouflage, the VISR mode on his HUD outlined their appearance in a red hue and kept him aware of their status. He was ultimately grateful for it. As a fully fledged Spartan, Izuku couldn't allow his personal feelings for his teammates hamper his abilities in the field. In his most private thoughts, he wanted nothing more than to keep them close. To have them within arm's reach at all times. Though he knew that wouldn't be practical. Izuku figured that his concern was simply a result of the intense fear he felt after his recovery. He was the first one of their team to wake up from the augmentations. 3 whole days before the next member, Will, had regained consciousness, and another 5 days after that until the others came to. He spent every minute that he was allowed by their sides, wondering if they'd make it. During all that time, misery fiendishly gnawed at him from the inside out. The doctors had made exactly one attempt to try and convince him to leave for a little while. They said that it would be best if he took some time for himself so that he could relax. Izuku couldn't quite remember how it all played out, but he knows for certain that he didn't make any threats. Actually, he doesn't remember if he'd said anything at all. Either way, the doctors refrained from asking him again, and he recognized a little bit of fear in their eyes whenever he talked with them after that. He made a mental note to apologize when he saw them again. But that would have to wait. Right now, they have a mission to complete. Izuku keyed the built-in comms system and spoke in a steady manner. Mythic 1 to control, exterior guards have been neutralized. We're entering the compound now, over. Acknowledged, Mythic 1. Good hunting. Izuku raised his right hand to the side of his head. With 2 fingers out, he made a sideways cutting motion towards the entrance of the warehouse. Move in. A different fireteam, Legacy, formed up around the door and silently made their way inside. Mythic team followed right behind them, while the last one, Foxglove, brought up the rear. Again, Izuku couldn't help but be impressed with their new armor. Despite their immense weight, they didn't make so much as a scuffle as they progressed through the dingy corridors of the building. They might not be in the middle of the city, but starting a loud and undoubtedly explosive fight was sure to attract attention. 3 teams in total entered the warehouse. Fireteams Mythic, Legacy, and Foxglove made up the assault group, while all of the other remaining teams were put under the support group. The 3 teams were the only ones to have all of their members survive the augmentations without being crippled. Because of that, they were considered to be the most combat effective, and thus the best choice for their first had no intention of proving them wrong. One of the Spartans in the lead team, Keiichi, threw his hand and made the signal for them to stop. A flash of red light in the corner of Izuku's HUD caught his eye. The built-in motion sensor had picked something up. A single hostile was making their way toward the Spartans' positions, less than 20 meters away. They walked into view slowly, cradling a case of alcohol in one arm and a large bag of food in the other. He came to a stop in front of a door, kicked it, and yelled, "Hey, open up, my hands are full." Once again, Izuku was impressed with his armor. The guy was completely unaware that there were a dozen heavily armed and armored heroes standing not even 10 meters away. Between the active camouflage system and sound-absorbent materials, he'd sooner spot a ghost than he would them. It was just like Mei said, it's a piece of art. However, for all of the advantages it provided the wearer, they'd made an error. Not the designers of the suit, but the Spartans themselves. A small oversight that Izuku realized too late. It was the way the man scrunched his face, like something most foul had offended his senses. No, It was more accurate to describe it as an expression of confusion. As if he'd encountered something that shouldn't have been there. A long, slender, serpentine tongue shot forth from their lips, sampling the air itself. His eyes, reptilian eyes, snapped from the door straight towards Izuku. What the hell? That's when Izuku noticed it. The tiniest flecks of fluid adorned his armored gloves. It was the blood and spittle that had come from the guard he'd punched outside. Shit. Hey! The criminal shouted. Or, at least, that's what he probably meant to shout. Instead, it came out as a screech as a short burst of bullets tore through his chest and sent him flying backwards. Smoke billowed from the barrel of Keiichi's SMG. Apparently, he'd realized what was happening and chose to act on it. It didn't help much. The bottles and containers of food crashed to the ground, adding to the noise of Keiichi's M7S. The submachine guns they had were specially outfitted with silencers, but that didn't mean they completely negated the noise. In the tight space of the hallway, the sound reverberated. There was a moment of silence. "We've got company," someone shouted from inside the room. The Spartans were already moving before they'd finished the sentence. Their legs were a blur as they ran into positions, muscle memory taking over. Fireteam Legacy ran past the door and settled in place so that they could provide security up one side of the hall, while Fireteam Foxglove continued to watch the rear. That left Fireteam Mythic, his team, to make the breach. The four of them waited 1.5 meters away from the door, ready to strike. Izuku clenched his teeth in anticipation. Breaching a room was hazardous at best, and suicidal at worst. The odds were almost always in the defender's favor. At least, that's how it was 100 years ago. Things had changed since then. Izuku took a single step away from the wall, giving himself space to build up the necessary momentum. Then, in one smooth motion, he smashed right through it. Concrete and rebar erupted outward, showering the thugs inside with chunks of debris. This forced them to instinctively shield themselves from the newly made entrance. They weren't given any time to recover as the rest of Fireteam Mythic followed their teammate through the hole. Izuku found himself experiencing the same phenomenon they'd all apparently acquired. Spartan time. Information flooded Izuku's senses as the adrenaline in his body spiked. The world itself seemed to slow down as he took in his environment. He could make out the face of every criminal there in perfect detail. Some of them were contorted into expressions of rage, while others simply had looks of confusion, still unaware of what was happening. There were 7 in all, spread throughout the room and facing the door where they thought the Spartans would come enter. Izuku picked out the closest one and got to work. A large man with a mutant quirk stood just to his left. His massive, scaly arms covered his eyes, obstructing his vision. Izuku made quick work of him by throwing a hook punch to their midsection. Bones shattered and flesh rippled as the force of the blow was enough to send him flying across the room. He hadn't even hit the wall before Izuku set upon his next target. The woman in front of him had more time to react than her cohort, though not by much. She was able to raise her hand towards Izuku in an attempt to use her quirk, but that was as far as she got. An armored gauntlet embedded itself into her gut. Her violet eyes bulged for a split second, then blood spewed from her mouth. She was unconscious by the time she hit the ground. Izuku looked back to see the rest of the criminals in similar states. Mei and Will had already started the process of handcuffing them and securing their weapons, while Hitoshi took watch. Despite their unsightly injuries, he could tell that all of the gang members were still alive. The Spartans had been advised to keep the level of force to a minimum. It was best not to reveal how powerful they truly were. This way, they'd be able to surprise the real enemy. There was the other option of leaving no survivors. However, a warehouse full of mangled corpses would have surely turned more heads than the alternative. This way, the public could write it off as the emergence of a new group of underground heroes. Which, technically, was exactly what the Spartans are. For the most part, things were going along rather easily. Izuku would have preferred to cut his teeth on a harder operation, but he could understand the Commission's caution. Despite 6 years of training, things could easily go awry and it would be devastating to lose even one of them. Both for the Commission and the remaining Spartans. The pain of losing so many comrades was still raw. The memory of waking up after the procedure was fresh in Izuku's mind after all these months. One moment, he's talking with this team, telling themselves that everything would be fine and that their future as heroes was just around the corner. Next, he's being told that 35 of the most extraordinary people he's ever known are just gone. The surgeries that the doctors performed had been too invasive for some of their bodies to handle. There were another dozen or so that had survived, but were so disfigured that they had to be kept in medically induced comas because the pain was excruciating. The payoff, though, was, well, he still wasn't sure if it was worth it. If he was being honest with himself, he'd trade all of his newfound abilities if it meant that just one more Spartan had survived. But there was no changing the past, and he'd be damned if he squandered this power. His friends, his comrades, his family, had died. He wasn't going to let their deaths be in vain. The survivors had all promised to become the best, and save everyone they could. And with how much their bodies had been altered, it was a promise they could certainly keep. Super strength, speed, and reflexes were his. Not to mention his new physique. Not even 5 months ago, he was only 162 centimeters tall. Now, he towered over most others at an astonishing 205 centimeters. Most shocking was when he found out that was below average for the survivors. They would be an intimidating, unstoppable force of nature. Izuku shook his head. Now wasn't the time to think about that. Their cover was blown, and already his motion sensors were lighting up as more goons came to find out what had happened. Time to greet them. The subterranean hallway had to be at least 20 meters long. It was all smooth walls, without a single obstacle to be used as cover. At the end of the narrow expanse rested a door to the last room. Well, it was more apt to call it a vault, really. All the other doors were normal for a warehouse, but this one looked like it belonged in a bunker rather than some gang's hideout in the outskirts of the city. A small, open hole rested in the entryway, and the barrel of a gun poked out from it. Izuku was honestly more astounded than he was concerned. He couldn't tell for certain, but it looked like the firearm was an old Thompson submachine gun. They'd fallen out of military service some 200 years ago. Sure, they still packed a punch. The gun utilized .45 caliber bullets, and fired them at around 800 rounds per minute. Nothing to scoff at, but still, the thing belonged in a museum. These guys are weird, Izuku thought dully. They'd cleared out almost the entirety of the warehouse in 10 minutes. After they'd been discovered, the assault group threw stealth out the window. They met the gangsters with bullets, knives, fists, and feet. The Spartans emerged victorious, without so much as a scratch. The villains, on the other hand, well, it was a good thing that the support group had plenty of painkillers and stretchers. Izuku turned his attention back to the task at hand. They'd scoured the entire building and had made their way to the last area. The basement. He glanced at Fireteam Legacy. They'd volunteered to deal with the final room, and Izuku had to admit, he was excited to see what they'd do. Keiichi looked at his teammate, one of the fastest Spartans to have survived the augmentations, and nodded to her. "Mawata, you're up." She simply nodded back, and moved to the far end of the wall at the corner they were all waiting behind. She bent her legs, preparing herself to run, then took off. In a single step, she'd accelerated to 95 kilometers per hour. With each subsequent step after that, she only gained in speed. Light flashed from the barrel sticking out of the door. The first shot went wide, whizzing past her uselessly. The second shot hit her shoulder at an angle, ricocheting off the armor without any effect. The third shot struck true, and impacted dead center in the middle of the chest plate. However, the round lacked the force necessary to penetrate. It did little more than scratch the paint of the titanium alloy. The thug wasn't able to get off a fourth shot, as Mawata tucked her chin into her shoulder and slammed into the security door. 15 centimeters of steel gave way with an ear-splitting shriek. Or maybe that was the villain who was set up right behind it. The guard's face contorted into an expression of intense agony for a brief moment, then went slack as he passed out from the pain. The rest of Mawata's team and Mythic team bolted over to support her, though it was already over by the time they entered the pseudo-bunker. The last 3 gang members lay on the floor, their broken and unconscious bodies sprawled out at awkward angles. The one who'd been holding the Thompson SMG had gotten it the worse. It looked like he'd gotten caught in a stampede. Not only had all of his limbs, and most likely his ribs too, been broken in several spots, but blood also poured freely from the places where shrapnel from the door had pierced his skin. Fireteam Legacy got to work restraining the bodies and destroying any weapons, while Mythic stayed back so that they could keep watch for them. That's when Izuku got the chance to take in his surroundings. It was far more maintained than the rest of the warehouse. The floor had actual carpet, and appeared to have been vacuumed. The walls didn't have any paint peeling off them, and the furniture was in better condition than anything above. There was even a refrigerator in the back with a large flat-screen TV for entertainment. Between the heavy-duty door, the improved environment, and secure location underground, Izuku came to the conclusion that this must be a safe house of some kind. It just felt so disorienting. Compared to the rest of the warehouse, the room was of much better quality. He looked to Hitoshi for wisdom, but his teammate had little to offer besides an uninspired shrug. He then went back to keeping watch alongside Mei and Will. With nothing else to go on, Izuku activated his comms. Mythic 1 to control. All hostiles neutralize. The building is secure. Mission accomplished. Over. Chapter 12, December 6, 2167, 8:34. It had been almost a week since the Spartans' first mission. Operation Nightcrawler, as the Commission referred to it, was an overwhelming success. Despite several of them requiring serious medical attention, every last one of the 38 villains had been apprehended. Most importantly, all of it was accomplished without a single Spartan casualty. As a result of their achievement, the remaining teams who didn't have the opportunity to join the assault group were positively ecstatic to enter the fray, and the Commission was more than willing to oblige. There was, however, one last thing before they sent all of them on their merry way. A small ceremony of sorts, designed for a few key reasons. First, was to commemorate the Spartans for all of their hardships, especially those who didn't make it through the augmentations. Second, was to give them that extra morale boost for when they do head out into the larger world. Spartans don't actually need any form of motivation. The flesh could be melting from their very bones and they'd still carry out their mission with the same determination as they'd started with. Still, it wouldn't hurt to show them some support. Which led into the Commission's final motive for setting up this whole ordeal. Catherine Halsey stood with all of the poise and elegance that only a veteran scientist running off 2 hours of sleep over the past 3 days could pull off. She never was one for ceremonies or other such occasions. As far as she was concerned, it was a waste of time. There were plenty of other projects that she ought to be focusing on right now. But when it came to her Spartans, she'd always make an exception. Director Kenzo herself stood in front of the 3 teams that made up the assault group: Foxglove, Legacy, and Mythic. All 12 of the augmented humans stood perfectly still in a single line, shoulder to shoulder with one another. The other teams that had made up the support group stood behind them, equally motionless. All of the Spartans were still adorned in their SPI armor. For whatever reason, they preferred it over any other outfit that they'd been supplied with. For this occasion, however, they'd removed their helmets and held them firmly to their sides so that their faces could be seen. I know that I'm not the first one to say this, but I want you all to understand that everyone here believes this, Kenzo said. Even though she had to crane her neck, she made the effort to look at the dozen Spartans in front of her in the eyes. You, Spartans, are everything we could have hoped for and so much more. Earlier this month, you made your first mark upon this world. Some may view it as a trivial accomplishment, the elimination of a single gang. However, for the people of Ryloth City, they'll be able to rest easy with the knowledge that their home is that much safer. Although they won't know about you for some time, you all have become their heroes. Despite their cool and collected demeanor, they radiated satisfaction. For most of them, the chance to become a pro-hero was all they'd ever wanted. And through Halsey and the rest of the Commission's personnel, they'd given them more than just a chance. Director Kenzo hadn't been lying. The Spartans' augmentations far exceeded everything they could have ever hoped for. There were so many feats she'd observed in the weeks after their recovery. All of it reminded Halsey of the ancient Greek texts she'd once read. About demigods, who could tear mountains asunder and decimate entire legions of treacherous horrors. She had little doubt that, with a handful of exceptions, they could take on any other pro-hero in the world and come out on top. And this was all before they'd receive Mjolnir. After witnessing their capabilities, there were those in the commission who were absolutely terrified at what they'd created. Catherine's blood boiled at that particular sentiment. She knew her Spartans. They'd storm the most treacherous gates of hell and lay siege to the highest towers of heaven if it meant saving a single person. Of course, it wasn't the betrayal of innocent people that those in the commission were worried about. Never forget, however, everyone who worked tirelessly to make sure you got here, Kenzo continued. From the instructors and the doctors, to the financial and logistical personnel, the cooks, cleaners, and tech experts who were able to keep away any prying eyes. Most importantly, your own fallen teammates, who helped shape you into the heroes you are today. It was through the support of everyone involved that you stand where you are today. I ask that you remember all those in the commission, who help you on your journey to saving this world. That's where the last reason for the ceremony came into place, to remind the Spartans who they worked for. It wasn't so much a threat, as it was meant to be a reminder of what their relationship was. The commission had provided them with everything they'd needed to become the greatest heroes of their age. All it had cost was kidnapping them from their homes, enduring 6 years of brutal training, undergoing the most invasive physical augmentations ever performed, and then losing dozens of their brothers and sisters in arms to said augmentations. It wasn't totally unreasonable to assume they'd harbor some sort of animosity towards the ones that had put them through all of that. Not even Halsey was sure if they'd eventually turn their backs on the commission. She'd assured the members of the board numerous times that there was no reason to question the Spartans' loyalties, but that was simply to dispel any notion of uncertainty. If it did ever come to that, Halsey knew she wouldn't blame them. In the meantime, however, there was still work to be done. Now then, with all of that said, I believe it's time we turn to the meat of this gathering, Kenzo said as she motioned to Catherine. Report to Dr. Halsey. She'll provide each of your teams with the dossiers that contain necessary information for your new missions. Once again, congratulations, Spartans. One by one, the teams came to her for their assignments. Their faces might have been passive, but the way they carried themselves was clear. They were yearning for a chance to get out into the world. They'd all been given a task of extraordinary difficulty, but it was here that Catherine had the utmost confidence. Whether it be neutralizing more gangs, spying on suspected MLA assets, or hunting down turncoat pro-heroes, it didn't matter. They'd be ready. It may take some time for them to realize, but she was already well aware of just how capable they were. There was only one thing left to do now, to ensure their total dominance in the field. She'd speak with Dr. Shield later today. It didn't matter what she had to do. Her Spartans were going to receive their Mjolnir armor before the end of winter. December 8, 2167-2205 Yagi Toshinori, otherwise known as All Might, watched the television with only a vague interest. He was already aware of what the news anchor would report. No new information regarding the situation had arisen, but they'd keep the public informed. He'd already heard the same thing on several other channels throughout the evening. A whole week after the raid, as people were now calling it, and yet no new discovery had been made about the group who'd conducted it. The police were adamant that it was just a team-up between underground heroes. Nothing out of the ordinary. That didn't stop the public's interest, especially when several of the villains' confessions had gone viral. Their reports ranged from something out of a sci-fi epic all the way to the supernatural. A few of them explained that the heroes were clad in strange space-age bulletproof armor. Some didn't have the chance to see their attackers. One moment they're hearing screaming and gunfire, and the next, they're being thrown around like a rag doll. Others, those who were quite visibly traumatized, said that there were no heroes at all. Instead, they explained that they were demons who'd crawled from the depths of hell to punish them for their crimes. Obviously, this had piqued Yagi's curiosity, as well as the curiosity of numerous other pro-heroes. Being good friends with many officers, he was made privy to the criminals' injuries. Even with all of his experience, he found that it was disturbing. Some of them better resembled a crumpled pretzel rather than a human being. He could easily determine which of them had been shot and which had met them in hand-to-hand combat. Those with bullet wounds had fewer injuries. Concussions, hemorrhaging, ruptured organs, and broken bones were among the most common. It was especially concerning when one considered just how much stronger humans were today compared to what they were before the age of quirks. Injuries that would have put a person in the ICU before wouldn't even warrant a doctor's visit in the modern day. Whoever these mysterious new heroes were, they'd proven that they were a number of things. Strong, stealthy, well-equipped, but most unfortunately, brutally vicious. As Yagi prepared himself for an early night, he made a mental note to stop by his old sidekick's agency on his way to Might Tower. Perhaps I should visit Sir Night-Eye again. He was right about young Mirio. He's an exceptional candidate for One for All. At the very least, I just need to find someone to pass it on to before it's too late. Chapter 13, January 16, 2168-2124. Fireteam Gauntlet no longer existed. With Miyu dead and Nen in a medically induced coma, the team had been labeled combat ineffective. Like most others that had lost too many members, they'd been merged together with other remnants to form an entirely new group. From the ashes of Gauntlet and Triumph, Fireteam Phoenix had emerged. Himiko and Kami had welcomed their new comrade, Tom, with open arms. Sure, he wasn't their original teammate, but he was a Spartan, and Spartans were always there for one another. Phoenix was currently only made up of the three of them, as the doctors announced that Nen could possibly be saved, and thus, reinstated. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for Fireteam Triumph. Nyoko, Chikako, and Yasu had all perished during the augmentation, leaving Tom as the sole survivor. He was handling it about as well as could be expected. Himiko spared a quick glance at him, or, at least, the outline that her HUD presented her with. All of them were concealed by their armor's active camouflage system on account of being in the middle of an operation. Still, Himiko wanted to remind him that he wasn't alone. That he had a team. She remembers some of her life before she was chosen to become a Spartan. She remembers the pressure to be normal, to suppress herself, and act just like the rest of her schoolmates. But the commission was different. They encouraged her behavior. Hell, they practically praised it. Mendez-sensei in particular commended her ability to be both horrifically viscous and surgically precise in her attacks. However, the thing that still made her choke up every once in a while was the way her fellow Spartans had accepted her. Her Himiko. Not that dull imitation her parents had tried to force her to be. It was the very thing that made her realize that she would do anything for her friends. She shifted across the roof they were hiding on and bumped Tom on the shoulder with her own. It was something that the Spartans had come up with years ago during their training. In times where absolute silence was necessary, they'd resorted to using nonverbal ways of communicating. A simple bump or nudge of the shoulder had become their go-to method of saying, "Hey, I'm here for you." Tom managed to give a small nudge back, to show that he appreciated her support, but his focus never left the mission. It was for the best. Their target, their prey, was completely unaware of the Spartan's presence. Tatsuyuki Tokaname, though most would know him by his hero name, slid and go. From his appearance to his demeanor, one could immediately tell he was a hero. An impressive physique coupled with positive and compassionate interactions with civilians made it perfectly obvious how he'd done so well in his career. Although he wasn't the highest ranking on the charts, many still sang his praises for all the work he's done. It was the perfect cover. No one would ever guess that he was involved with a massive insurrectionist group whose goal was to overthrow the country. It infuriated her. No, it was more than that. Fury, anger, frustration. They were all too tame of a description. Right now, at this very moment, there were Spartans who were enduring such horrendous agony from their failed augmentations that not even the greatest painkillers in history could completely dull the excruciating sensation. Some of their bodies had been warped to the point that Himiko could hardly recognize some of them, including Nen. Then, there were those who never made it past the augmentations. Those who would never get the chance to fulfill their dreams. They wanted nothing more than to become a hero. To become that beacon of hope for the innocent. To be the light that shines courageously in the darkness. Yet here was some asshole who had the audacity to take a shit on the very thing that her friends had died trying to achieve. So yeah, to put it simply, Himiko was eagerly awaiting what they had planned for this fake. But first, they had to catch him. Search and destroy missions were among Himiko's favorite, and because of their team's quirks, Dr. Halsey had told them that they'd be assigned as many as they liked. With her ability to transform, Cammy's illusions, and Tom's tracking quirk, they were the perfect ones for this task. On her left, Cammy made the motion for them to begin. She brought her fist up, raised 2 fingers, and then pointed them at Slid and Go. Move in. Himiko took off in an instant. She leapt from rooftop to rooftop, always observant of her target, waiting for the right time between each jump. He was currently making his way along a rather empty street, stopping periodically to help or talk with a random civilian. Finally, she landed atop the last building and got into position. The plan was simple, though that was for the best. Fewer moving parts meant fewer things that could go wrong. What they'd come up with was to have Cammy use her illusionary quirk to draw Slid and Go into a secluded alleyway. She'd pretend to be a civilian, calling for help. From there, she and Himiko would ambush and subdue the traitor, during which Tom would be providing overwatch from the rooftops. He'd have to look out for any civilians or other heroes that could wander into their operation. Then, they'd transport the fake to a commission safe house where they'd interrogate him. Except that plan was now bust. Slid and Go went from a casual pace to racing down the street at breakneck speed. His destination seemed to be an alleyway similar to the one that the Spartans were at, but on the opposite side of the street. There must be a commotion in there that caught his attention. Himiko looked to Cammy for orders. The leader of the team hesitated before she ultimately made the motion for them to fall back. It looked like they'd reconvene and try again another time. After all, the night was still young. The decision was likely made easier on account of Tom's quirk. For the next 24 hours, they'd be aware of his every move. The 3 of them met up on the original rooftop they started at, where Cammy began to lay out the new plan. All right, so long as he keeps to his patrol route, then we can just catch him further down the road. Here, this looks like a good place. A small map of the area appeared on her HUD, with Slid and Go's patrol route highlighted. An objective marker appeared at an alleyway similar to theirs, but several blocks away. Himiko chewed on the inside of her cheek. It's just a little hiccup, nothing more. We'll get this fake soon enough. That's when things took a turn for the worse. Something's wrong, Tom said. He went down, and it doesn't seem like he's getting back up. Cammy responded immediately to this new information. Both of you, get over there now. I'll take up Overwatch. The 2 of them leapt off the roof of the 3-story building without hesitation. Their boots hit the ground with a dull thud, the impact from the drop doing nothing to hinder them as they took off at full speed towards the alley where Slid and Go entered. During the middle of the day, when civilians were out in droves, they might have been more apprehensive about breaking their cover to sprint across the street. However, there were considerably less people walking around at this time of night. A few pedestrians seemed to have noticed them if their startled gasps were anything to go by. If they had more time, they could have used their active camouflage or Cammy's illusions to cross the street without being seen. But as it was, time wasn't on their side. For whatever reason, their target was in peril. They couldn't let him die, they needed to interrogate him. If their information was right, Slid and Go was pretty high up in the MLA's chain of command. There was valuable knowledge to be extracted from him. It only took a moment for the pair of Spartans to reach the alley. With her penchant for close-quarters combat, Himiko took point while Tom directed her to their target's location. Despite their helmets being equipped with night vision and the flashlights attached to their SMGs, the pair had no need for them. The Spartans had discovered early on after graduation that perfect night vision was among their list of augmentations. It gave them that much more of an advantage in situations like these. It wasn't long until they heard something. A voice. It was low, male, and positively dripping with venom. "You're nothing but a blight upon society," it sneered. Real heroes are those who protect the innocent regardless of whatever your ideology is. They're always looking for someone to help, even in the smallest ways possible. There's no place for vanity nor glory or even hatred. You're nothing but a fraud. A fake. Himiko stopped for a split second to process what she'd just heard. There was someone else hunting MLA operatives. How did they know that Slit and Go was one of them? In fact, how did they even know about the MLA in general? Has there been a leak in the commission? Realizing that they wouldn't get any answers by standing there, Himiko signaled to Tom. Then the both of them rounded the corner and brought their SMGs to bear. Freeze! Himiko shouted. In the center of the open area was Slit and Go. He lay there on the ground with blood pooling around him. The only sign that he was still alive came in the form of the weak up and down motions his chest made as he struggled to breathe. Standing over him was a man that honestly looked like a trash can full of kitchen knives had come to life. It all finally clicked for Himiko. This is the elusive hero killer, Stain. And with his boot on the traitor's chest and his crude blade poised to strike, he was one move away from killing the person that they needed to capture alive. Unacceptable. Slit and Go was their target. Depending on the information they pulled from him, they could save possibly millions of lives. But the situation they were in right now was delicate. Not only was he in a position to end Slit and Go with a single swipe of the arm, but the Spartans were unaware of what skills he possessed or what his quirk was. He was certainly dangerous on account of the dozen heroes he'd killed by this point, so the two of them would have to proceed with caution. It was times like these that Himiko found herself just a little bit envious of Fireteam Mythic. With Hitoshi at their side, any hostage situation would be a breeze. As it was, Fireteam Phoenix would just have to adapt. After all, Spartans made do with what they had. Akaguro Chizome, you're under arrest, Himiko said slowly. She held her position since she worried that even the slightest of movements would provoke a reaction from the villain. Lay down your weapons, get on your knees, and put your hands on your head. If you disobey, we will engage with lethal force. Instead of acknowledging the fact that there were two SMGs pointed at him, Stain chose to run his mouth. Huh, you must be the so-called demons of the commission. I was wondering when we'd cross paths. I'll get to you later, I'm busy at the moment. Get out of here, kid, Slit and Go wheezed out, before he kills you too. Himiko reels in her disgust as she addresses him. Tatsuyuki Tokaname, you are also under arrest. That caught the both of them off guard. What? Slit and Go weakly asked. I don't underst. Can it, you fraud? Tom growls. Himiko's surprised, but only for a nanosecond. Of course Tom would loathe him or any other traitor. She knows it won't interfere with his duty. His resolve to be a hero would always outweigh his hatred for a turncoat. There's a glimmer that materializes in Stain's eyes. It almost resembles the way Mendez-sensei would look at them whenever the Spartans did something perfectly. But the villain's expression seems more vindictive. We know about your involvement with the self-proclaimed Meta-Liberation Army, Himiko states. You're to be brought in for questioning, then imprisoned for your betrayal. In an instant, Slit and Go lost any form of composure he previously had. What? How did you know? I don't know what you're talking about. I've never heard of this meta army or whatever you called it. I'm innocent. As the turncoat sputtered uselessly on the ground, Stain allowed some of the tension in his body to dissipate. He never took his focus away from the two barrels that were unwaveringly pointed at his head, but he was thoroughly invested in whatever was transpiring between the demons and his prey. As it turns out, the villain's attention was in the wrong place, just as the Spartans hoped it would be. Kami, fully aware of the conundrum her team was in thanks to them activating their comms, snuck up behind the villain. She'd gotten so close that if she didn't have her helmet on, she'd be breathing down his neck right now. That's when she acted. One arm shot out and grasped the hand in which held the sword, while the other formed a fist and impacted the back of Stain's head with just enough force to knock him out. His body collapsed like a sack of rocks, hanging uselessly from the arm that Kami grasped. Beneath them, Slit and Go gasped, obviously just as shocked by the reveal of another Spartan as Stain would have been. As she looked down on him, the traitor got the feeling that there'd be no chance to talk his way out of this. When Kami addressed the traitor, there was no warmth in her voice. There was no trace of all the usual compassion or confidence that the other Spartans knew her for. Instead, her tone was cold and promised unimaginable pain should this filth so much as consider the very idea of defying them. We've got questions for you, and you will answer them. January 22, 2168 6:15 Ray found recon missions to be rather peaceful. There was a certain allure to the outside world that he'd never been able to appreciate before. After spending the last 6 years of his life confined to a single remote island somewhere in the vast Pacific Ocean, the urban setting of Musutafu Ward was a novelty for him. Being able to watch people go about their daily lives, no matter how mundane, instilled a sense of tranquility in him. Ray figured that it might have just been his fascination with seeing new faces. He loved his team, but looking at the same ugly mugs year after year could become grating. Or at least, the ones who were still alive. Fireteam Chimera, like so many others, had been forged from the remnants of two broken teams. Saren and Daisuke came from Justice, whereas he and Akari originated from Phantom. There were some growing pains at first. Pretty standard stuff. Ray would sometimes catch himself calling out for Sadao, his old teammate, while Saren or Daisuke were to tell some sort of inside joke only to remember that he and Akari didn't know it. The pain was still there, but it was receding. However, the most apparent difference had been the switch in command. He had no qualms against Saren's leadership. In fact, he found that he enjoyed certain aspects of it. Sure, she was no Amiko, but that was to be expected. As Mendez-sensei explained, there was no one specific way to become a good leader, so everyone would be different. That being said, it still took some time to get used to the change. Fireteam Phantom was true to their name, like shadows in the night. Their target never knew they were there until it was too late. Fireteam Justice was proficient in stealth as well. They were Spartans, after all. But more often than not, the element of surprise was considered to be a nifty trick rather than a crucial tactical advantage. It was on their first true mission that they'd come to understand this divergence from their original doctrine when Saren insisted on something she dubbed aggressive reconnaissance. It had been an interesting development in their dynamic. Their current mission, however, was different. Control had been quite clear that this was strictly reconnaissance. There'd be no fighting or any other sort of action until they'd gathered enough intelligence. They were to stay on this rooftop with their active camouflage on and keep their heads down. Avoid drawing any sort of attention towards themselves. Their target. The Yakuza. Yes, the same Yakuza that had been slowly stumbling into their own grave for the past 100 and some odd years. Apparently, this particular group that they'd been watching for the last week had gone through something of a resurrection over the course of several years. The commission had suspected that they'd forcefully carved out a place in the local drug trade by killing off their competition. With what Fireteam Chimera had seen, they'd determined that was only part of it. The real change in the Shi-Hasaikai was its new management, Shisaki Kai, otherwise known as Overhaul. Standing at almost 180 centimeters with a large bird mask and a big, fluffy purple-collared jacket, the guy gave off serious, "I'm a supervillain" vibes. Under his rule, the previously withering gang had flourished into a criminal powerhouse. Chief among them was his new lieutenants. The 8 Bullets. They had money, they had numbers, they had equipment, and most alarmingly, they had the knowledge to use all of it in tandem. From the observation devices that they'd managed to place around the compound, Ray freaking loved his SPI armor. They'd discovered that the Shi-Hasaikai were making some fancy new weapon that worked opposite of Trigger. A means of eliminating someone's quirk. Not a problem for the Spartans, but it certainly was for any other pro-hero. Something that the Commission hoped would apply for the MLA, too. It was certainly a valuable tool. Quirk suppressant technology had been around for years now, but the key downfall was in its name. Quirk suppressant. It only suppressed one's abilities, and even then, it did nothing to mitigate someone who was a mutant type. The tactical advantages these weapons could provide was game-changing. So here they were, running recon in preparation for a full-on raid. The goal would undoubtedly be to secure the information on how to create quirk-eliminating weapons, as well as any possible samples. while completely dismantling the HPSC. Just another day in the life of a Spartan. To his left, Akari addressed all of them. Movement by the eastern entrance. As Ray and the others shifted their focus towards the area, he made sure his helmet was recording the odd scene that unfolded before them. A little girl with long white hair and a panicked face was desperately running away from the compound. Ray zoomed in so that he could capture her appearance in better detail. He noticed a horn that protruded from her forehead, the ragged clothes she wore, and the plethora of bandages that covered her limbs. Behind her, one of the HPSC's men chased after. The whole thing screamed, "Prisoner." It didn't take long for the goon to grab her. The child struggled for a bit, but then went limp in the man's arms. Ray was confused. He didn't see him hit or inject her with anything. Was it the villain's quirk? She seemed to still be conscious, if the frightened look she had was anything to go by. Once inside, he was greeted by Chisaki himself. Their mouths might have been hidden behind their bird masks, but the way their heads bobbed up and down made it clear that they were talking. "Do we have audio?" Saren asked. "Pulling it up now," said Daisuke. The internal speakers of Ray's helmet crackled to life as voices started to come through the devices they'd planted. "Apologize, sir. I only looked away for a moment, but she's fast." "She certainly is," Chisaki agrees. He turns his attention to the child. "Well, Eri, because of that little stunt I'll be restricting your outdoor time. It looks like you'll have to get used to staying in your room for a lot longer now. As for you." He faces his minion once again. "I'm not one to tolerate failure." Behind the self-assured safety of their walls, where Overhaul is certain that there's no one to see them, he makes his move. One of his white gloves comes off and he brushes his finger against his subordinate's cheek. The movement is so fast that the henchman doesn't even react. Then he exploded. There was no warning. There was no time for him to scream or fight back or run away. One instant, there's an average-looking goon standing there and talking to his boss. The next, blood was flying in all directions. It sprayed across the concrete, the grass, the walls, the trees, the other henchmen standing around, and even over the girl, Eri. It went everywhere. No, not everywhere. Ray realizes that not a single drop has landed on Chisaki. Yet he was right there, at the epicenter. That's when Ray puts it together. This is Overhaul, the quirk. The dossier they'd received had explained that it was capable of manipulating matter at the molecular level. However, it failed to mention that he could turn someone into a liquid with a single touch. They'd have to update the villain's profile. This was something that couldn't be overlooked. However, Overhaul was about to unknowingly demonstrate another facet of his ability. Ray and his team watched with bated breath as the villain knelt down next to the puddle. With the same hand that had killed his own minion, he dipped a single finger into the macabre mess. There was a rippling effect through the blood, like a stone being thrown into a lake. In an instant, the henchman had been reformed. He took a deep, shaky breath, but remained completely still otherwise. From the listening devices that they'd installed, they were able to barely pick up what Overhaul said. "Can't just go around leaving messes everywhere. It's unsanitary." With that, he turned around and led Eri back into the compound. She didn't scream. She didn't cry. She didn't put up any sort of resistance. She was used to this. Up on the rooftop, Fireteam Chimera was processing what they'd just seen. "That's his quirk?" Akari asks. He recognizes that cool and steady tone to her voice. It's the one she uses when she's drowning out her shock by hyper-analyzing the situation. He understands fully. No one had been expecting that. "Yeah," Daisuke says evenly. This is a lot more serious than we expected." "Doesn't matter." Ray huffs. The image of the man bursting like a balloon had stunned him. It'd probably haunt his dreams for many nights to come. But the thought of Eri being subjected to that torture for even another second broke him out of his shocked state. "There's a kid down there. She's scared and surrounded by villains. She needs our help." His words were met with nods of agreement from the others. This was what they'd trained for. This was what 6 years of training had led up to. Someone right in front of their eyes was in need of saving. There wasn't a chance in hell that they'd fail her. "We're gonna need some backup for this one." There's a lot more going on here than we initially suspected, Saren concluded. Then, she shifted from serious to downright mischievous. She looks to her teammates. Don't worry, though. We're gonna make this right. We'll get those weapons and get that airy girl to safety. As for the top dog himself, I've got something in mind for him. Ray felt a devious smile creep upon his face. February 1st, 2168. 1950 Mawada parried the villain's punch and counterattacked. A quick jab to the face, a cross punch to the chest, and a powerful uppercut aimed at his center of mass. That was it. 3 strikes. A fraction of a second, and yet the damage was catastrophic. The force of her armored gauntlet smacking his hand out of the way broke his wrist, the jab had dislocated his jaw, the cross had cracked a rib, and the uppercut was delivered with such strength that the goon was lifted off of his feet and into the air. He crashed into the ground with as much grace as a falling vending machine. It was messy. Behind her, the sounds of fighting came to an end and the chorus of agony-induced groans began to rise from the few who were still conscious. Her teammate, Keiichi, called out to the rest of them. To those who can hear me, don't make any sudden moves. We're coming around to handcuff all of you. Should anyone try to resist, you'll find out firsthand just how much we were holding ourselves back. With Keiichi and Grace watching their backs, Mawada and Aiko went to work. By this point the whole process was routine. In fact, the only thing that broke the monotony was seeing the varying states that each villain was in. Some of them had pretty standard wounds, broken bones and bullet holes, whereas others looked like they'd tried to cosplay as cheap foldable chairs. It was amusing, in a dark and barbaric sort of way. But Mawada knew that there was a method to the madness. Every beatdown that they inflicted was done with a purpose. Each one aimed to instill a particular sense of dread within villains across the country. It was psychological warfare at its purest. Word would spread amongst the criminal underworld about entire gangs who were found by the police in various states of suffering. Everything from the mundane to the downright savage. Even the most wicked of fiends would think twice before carrying out any more nefarious plans. It was something that's already taken effect after their very first mission, Operation Nightcrawler. Rumors had spread like wildfire, mostly due to the extraordinary fear portrayed in the gang members. One could easily pick up on the horror in any of their eyewitness accounts. In fact, actually fighting small-time gangs like this one had become something of a rarity. Between the last 7 groups of villains that they'd been sent after, less than half of them had decided to fight back. The others simply threw up their hands as soon as they figured out that there were Spartans in their base. But the most impressive thing? None of those gangs were in Ryloth City, the city where Operation Nightcrawler had taken place. Some of the cities they'd been in were almost 100 kilometers apart. Word had traveled fast. Word had traveled very fast and very far. Mawada swiftly cut off her own train of thought. She couldn't afford to think about such things right now, not while they were in the middle of a mission. There'd be time to relax when they were safe and most certainly not in a building occupied by enemies. After securing all of the villains in the room, the team moved out into the hallway of the abandoned building. There was one last place they had to check before they'd completely cleared the structure: the loading dock. At their pace, it wasn't even a minute away. The building they were in now was nowhere near as expansive as the one they'd raided back during Nightcrawler. There were also fewer goons here and they were a lot less dangerous than the ones they'd faced back then, too. Now that Mawada thought about it, she wasn't sure if the villains were getting easier, or the Spartans were getting better. She decided that it was a little bit of both. Finally, they reached a door with a glowing sign: Loading Dock. Above it. They breached it and scanned the room for even the slightest hint of trouble. It was as they were halfway into the room that their motion trackers lit up. A large red blip materialized on the very edge of their range, though it was moving towards them at a quick pace. A loud, booming voice called out to them from where the villain supposedly was, which was behind a seemingly innocuous wall. "Ya fucked wid da wrong crowd dis time, ya lil shits." And with that, an absolute behemoth of a man burst out from the concrete. Every member of Fireteam Legacy was tall. Well over 2 meters. But this guy stood at least another half a meter over them, with mountains of muscles bulging from underneath his clothing. His face was twisted into a gleeful sneer with blood-red eyes that promised death for anyone he could get his hands on. The closest to him, Grace, opened fire. Her SMG barked as the stream of 5mm rounds sailed into the villain's kneecaps in an attempt to non-lethally neutralize him. However, unlike all the other goons that had crumpled to the floor after a similar attack, the hulking giant simply tilted his head back and filled the loading dock with raucous laughter. Gonna have to do better than dat." He sprinted towards the center of their formation, right to the one that had dared to shoot him. The rest of the team squeezed off as many rounds as they could, but his size did nothing to portray his speed. For someone that had to be closing in on 200 kilos, he was deceptively fast. His tree trunk-sized arm swiped at Grace, but she dodged the strike and leapt out of his way. Keiichi's voice crackled over her comms, "Bulldog. Just like Mendez-sensei said, if bullets aren't working, you're just not using the right type of ammunition." Mawada attached her SMG to the magnetic holster on her thigh plate and reached for the weapon on her back. The CQS-48 Bulldog. It was a magazine-fed, pump-action, 12-gauge shotgun that could be loaded with just about any ammo variant that had been manufactured. This particular one happened to be loaded with 00 or double-aught buckshot, a rather powerful cartridge. "Ya know who we are, huh? Ya know who I am? I'm da fucking SKULLCRUSHA." With everything she'd seen, Mawada was able to reach a decisive conclusion regarding the giant in front of her. This guy's a freaking loon. With his back turned to her and his attention solely focused on maniacally ranting to them, Mawada calmly took aim. They had to have dumped 4 magazines into the giant already, and yet he took no notice of it. As far as she was concerned, they'd given him plenty of opportunities to settle this without causing too much harm. She wasn't willing to take a chance with any of teammates' lives. Mawada was going to put Skullcrusher down. Hard. In contrast to the M7S, which used smaller bullets and had a suppressor affixed to the barrel, the sound of the Bulldog going off was absolutely thunderous. The differences didn't end there, either. As opposed to the pistol-caliber rounds that were bouncing off his natural armor, the buckshot hit with enough force to knock him off balance. The first shot impacted right between his shoulder blades, causing the villain to lurch forward. The second and third slammed into the small of his back, while the last 4 landed at various other points. By the time all 7 shells had been spent, the villain was on his knees and breathing heavily. As it turned out, he wasn't finished. Rather than screaming in pain or begging for mercy like Mawada had expected, the villain let loose a hearty laugh. He jumped to his feet and dramatically turned around to face her. "Ha ha 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 ha. That actually tickled, squirt." He didn't look any worse for wear. Keiichi's voice once again crackled over her comms, though Mawada could guess that this time it was addressed to everyone. With the amount of spite that radiated from his tone, she didn't need a telepathic quirk to tell that he was done with the villain. Fuck him up. They readily complied. Being the fastest of the group, Mawada was able to make the first strike. Skullcrusher had seen her coming and had just enough time to throw a wild haymaker towards her head. She ducked under it with ease and delivered the most ruthless punch she could muster towards leg, right into his inner thigh. The villain dropped to one knee, a grimace now etched into his face, though he was far from defeated. He cocked his arm back in preparation to throw a punch at her. That's when the rest of her team entered the fray. Aiko latched onto the arm that was posed to deal a devastating strike while Keiichi grasped the other one. Together, the two of them kept the villain from getting back on his feet. Grace came in from the side and sent a monstrous-looking hook punch into the gigantic villain's cheek. His head snapped to the side with a couple of teeth and blood shooting out as well, but he didn't seem to lose any of his seemingly limitless vigor. Mawada aided her teammate by throwing a powerful cross-punch at his jaw and was rewarded with the sound of bone cracking. But again, he shrugged it off. He yanked his left arm in an attempt to free it, so Grace followed up with her own cross, to which Mawada threw a hook. Cross, cross, hook, cross, hook, hook, cross. On and on it went until Mawada intrinsically aware of Grace's position, moved out of the way. She was treated to a front row seat as the largest member of her team moved in close and spin side kicked the villain square in his chest. The blow forced the air from his lungs and sent him sailing several meters through the loading dock and onto his back. He didn't get up after that. The sound of glass clinking against concrete reached her ears. On the ground, just a few meters away, a small syringe rolled around. It must have fallen from Skullcrush's pockets during his impromptu flight. Aiko moved diligently towards it. With great care, she picked it up and examined it. Trigger, she clarified. Looks like he juiced himself upright before he went all Incredible Hulk on us. This in it over, demons. The villain called out from his position on the floor. The team immediately got into a fighting stance, but once they realized that the only thing moving was his mouth, they eased up a bit. Y'all think er safe? Y'all think er strong? Y'all ain't seen nothing yet? We're with Da League, emselves. Aiko's head tilted slightly to the side. More than likely, she was just as astounded as Mawata was that the guy could still form words. The League? Ha ha ga. That's right, Da League of villains, he trailed off. The Goliath of a man finally succumbed to the pain and fell into unconsciousness. The League of Villains? Grace asked incredulously. It's a little on the nose, don't you think? Yeah, but even the dumbest of villains can get lucky sometimes. I'll make sure to inform Control, Keiichi warned. He brought his SMG up to eye level so that he could examine it. His expression might have been hidden behind the golden faceplate, but Mawata knew that disdain marred his features. In the meantime, we seriously need to update our arsenal. February 4, 2168 1950 Aizawa Shota leaned forward, certain that he misheard his employer. I'm sorry, it must be my old age creeping up on me. Can you explain that to me again? Don't be so dramatic, you're only 30, Principal Nezu replied cheerfully. Like I said, all I want you to do is get in contact with the so-called demon heroes of Japan. Establish a connection with them. See if you can get their contact information, if you can. Okay. Why? Because I'm curious, of course, about what? About them. Nezu proclaims as if it should have been obvious. Understanding that his employee wasn't following, he brought his hands together and elaborated a bit more. You see, I've been keeping tabs on them ever since their debut back in December, and I must say, they're quite fascinating. Aizawa simply raised an eyebrow. Oh, indeed. For instance, did you know that in the past month alone, the number 3 hero, Hawks, has teamed up with them on no less than 4 separate occasions? Hawks. The hero who doesn't even slow down enough to let his own sidekicks support him, let alone work with others. Before these new heroes showed up, he denied any team-ups recommended. It didn't matter who they were, from the most experienced veterans to the newest rookies looking to work with a big-timer. All right, Aizawa said with a shrug. Sure, that's unusual, but why does that make it as fascinating as you say? Because not only do they work together constantly, they do so with remarkable effects. Every time they've teamed up, the city they were in experienced on average a 12% drop in criminal activity. Some cities reported as much as 20. That kind of synergy doesn't pop up overnight. It implies that they share a strong, personal bond. Something that's been forged over both years and trials of life. They trust one another. HMPH, Aizawa grunts. All right, I'll admit, that is pretty interesting. Tell you what. You tell me why you really want me to go after them, and I'll agree to keep my eyes out. Deal? Absolutely. Nezu declares. The smile never leaves his face, even when he starts speaking again. You see, Hawks was purchased by the Commission before he was even 10 years old and forced to become a child soldier-hero combination. It stands to reason that the bond he shares with the demon heroes is based on shared trauma. As such, I'm led to believe that despite their phenomenal track record, these new heroes have faced similar abuse by the Commission. What? Nezu, smile still on his face, rests his chin on his hands. What do you mean, what? Aizawa is cool. Aizawa is collected. Aizawa is calm. Aizawa is calm. You just said that Hawks was purchased as a child, raised by the commission to be their pet hero, and that the demon heroes that everyone's been talking about have likely gone through the same thing. Indeed, I did. How did you figure this out? The smile finally fell from Nezu's face. Aizawa knew that when the chips were down, the principal would always take the well-being of his fellow heroes deadly serious. Well, that's been a long time in the works. Aizawa knew that was code for, "This is going to take a while, so get comfortable." You see, Nezu began. It all started not long after his debut. He's such a talented hero, it was no wonder that he climbed the leaderboards so fast. I was in awe of his abilities, so I did an extensive search of his history to see what helped mold him. What I found was a decade-old news article about a boy who saved the lives of dozens of people during a major traffic collision and then silence. Nothing, until his debut. And I do mean, nothing. No enrollment of any schools, no social media, no other instances of him saving any more people. And the parents? Somehow, shortly after the article was posted, they acquired an impressively large sum of money and moved out of the country, without their son. Aizawa leaned forward and pinched the bridge of his nose. Nezu thankfully stayed silent, aware of how much he'd just dumped on the teacher. Without looking up, the underground hero spoke in a soft voice. "All right, I'll find them." Chapter 14, February 14, 2168 604. Twin pairs of short, stubby legs made their way down the sidewalk at a good clip. The two boys laughed and jostled each other around, their banter distracting them from the chaos that was unfolding not even a block away from them. As they rounded the corner, a twinkle of light began to shine in the green-haired boy's eyes as he took off to get as close to the action as he could. The taller, blonde-haired one was quick to follow. It was a fight between two pro-heroes, Death Arms and Ryukyu, and some sort of bestial villain the size of a small house. It was the fight where Midoriya had died. Bakugo Katsuki knew it was a dream. He knew this was so because he'd had this exact same dream numerous times for years on end. There were some aspects that were different between each night, but for the most part it played out the same way. As the fight progressed, the buildings would be smashed apart, causing rubble to crash down around the crowd. He'd look up just in time to see an absolutely massive chunk of concrete coming straight for them all. Realizing that such an object would surely flatten them all, he took action. With speed and strength that he knew for certain he didn't have at that age, Katsuki would take aim and blast the debris into smithereens. The explosion would instantly catch the attention of those around him, including Izuku, who'd still been focused entirely on the battle. As his best friend picked up on the situation they were in, he'd begin to start shouting for everyone to get away from the area. The mass of civilians quickly turned into a stampede as they made a mad dash to evacuate the city street. Just in the nick of time, too, as the fight between the heroes and villain only escalated in brutality. Death Arms was practically sent flying by a single, powerful kick. Ryukyu looked to her comrade in concern, the momentary distraction leaving her open for a devastating punch from the villain. The sound of the impact was like a bomb going off. Blood erupted from both her nostrils and mouth. The attack was a savage one, but Ryukyu was too stubborn to be felled by a simple sucker punch. She rose to her full height, then spat at the ground to her left. Between the blood and saliva, a single one of her gigantic teeth struck the pavement. The Dragoon hero sucked in a breath, then let loose a viscous roar. Using her wings, she launched herself at the villain with renewed ferocity. Before she could engage in combat, however, a familiar battle cry resounded throughout the city. It promised both salvation for the innocent and immense pain for any who dare threaten them. Detroit Smash. The move was so fast that Katsuki couldn't even track it. One moment, the villain was standing tall and strong, looking around for the source of the noise. Next, they were simply embedded in the ground, with their arms and feet sticking out from the hole in various directions. A figure emerged from the impact crater. He had his fist raised in the air as a symbol of victory. Cheers erupted from the people around Katsuki while Midoriya looked ready to burst from his fan worship. Huh, so All Might showed up, he thought. It didn't happen every time he had this dream, but it was a regular enough occurrence that he could predict how it would end. All Might would praise the two of them for their actions, explaining how they were able to save the crowd. Izuku would ask that same damn impossible question and then it'd focus on him. Just as he'd done 100 times before, the symbol of peace made his way towards Katsuki and Midoriya. He got on one knee and addressed them in his signature booming, charismatic tone. "My boys, do you realize?" He leaned in close to them in an effort to portray his seriousness. "Do you realize that all these people are alive because of you two?" Katsuki was able to maintain his cool demeanor on account of being aware that he was in a dream. Izuku, being a figment of his subconscious, was practically bouncing with exuberance. "Please, tell me your names. I wish to recommend you both to the Hero School program. I'm certain that someplace like UA would accept you both without hesitation." "Right on, K." Midoriya piped up from Katsuki's side. "Are you sure, All Might? I don't have a..." His ramblings persisted for a few seconds before he finally paused to steady himself. He took in an immense breath and summoned all the courage he could muster in order to continue in a more collected manner. "All Might. Please, I have to ask you something serious. I need you to answer me honestly. Can someone like me, someone without a quirk, become a hero?" "My boy, the journey to become a hero will be perilous and far more difficult without something so beneficial," All Might explained earnestly. "But I can tell you without a doubt in my mind that if anyone can accomplish this, it's you." Izuku's eyes gleamed with an intensity that could outshine the brightest stars. After saying all he had to, the symbol of peace shifted his focus. "Congratulations, young Bakugo. You've saved these innocent people and young Midoriya. His parents will be able to see their child once again. They'll never have to grieve for his death and wonder what they could have done differently. I congratulate you, my boy, for being a hero." It was a nice dream. He preferred the nightmares. Somehow, it was easier to deal with the pain of the past than think about what could have been. Katsuki awoke silently as the alarm clock at his bedside blared incessantly. He turned it off with a single smack, then grabbed his water bottle. Any remaining sense of grogginess faded from his body as he drained the entire thing. Not only was cold water a good way to wake up quickly in the morning, but it was important to keep himself hydrated on account of how his quirk worked. It was hard to produce sweat without any liquids in the body. Especially for today. As he went about the rest of his morning routine, he noticed the butterflies in his stomach, which he then proceeded to crush without remorse. There was no reason to be nervous. Cautious, certainly. After all, he was about to take the entrance exam for the greatest heroic school in all of Japan. Some would even say the world. There'd be hundreds of other kids there at UA, some with quirks and skills he'd never dreamed of. It'd be pretty stupid of him to not be on his toes the entire time. But nervous? No, Katsuki had no reason to be nervous. After all the work he'd done, he had confidence in himself. His mind wandered as he viciously brushed his teeth. It wasn't too long ago that he would have dismissed the entirety of the competition as extras, nothing more than a sideshow on his way to become the #1 hero. It was still his dream to reach the top, of course, but his reasons for doing so had changed over time. It took a few hard knocks to the head and several heart-to-heart conversations, but... "Hey, brat, hurry up, your friends are waiting," his mother shouted. "They're not my friends," he yelled back. "Like hell they aren't. Just hurry it up." Katsuki gave a single, inaudible grunt before picking up the pace. It's not that he hated his acquaintances, it's just that it was hard to truly call anyone a friend after so long. The last time he'd acknowledged someone like that was with Izuku back when they were toddlers. Before he'd turned into an absolute ass. After a few more moments, he emerged from the bathroom and made his way to the living room. All around him were some of the most important people in his relatively short life. His parents, the Midoriyas, and the two morons who for some reason decided to keep him company. Neither Asui Tsuyu nor Shoji Mezzo went to his school. Instead, he'd met them at an event hosted by Ryukyu. It was something the Dragoon hero had been doing ever since the incident. It was a special event for children to meet their heroes over the course of 3 days. It was almost like a convention, though with a much younger audience in mind. Katsuki knew that his own emotional baggage would never compare to hers or the other heroes who'd failed to prevent the deaths of all those people that day. It was during his first time there that his life took a rather abrupt turn. Things had been going well. All of the other kids had taken the hint and were keeping their distance. He'd gotten to see Ryukyu outside of Izuku's funeral, and All Might himself had stopped by for a few minutes to give a speech about what it meant to be a pro-hero. All in all, it was nice. It was halfway through the ordeal that Sue had shattered the status quo and came right up to him. She deliberately chose not to heed his rude behavior. It took years before Katsuki was finally able to convince her to tell the truth. Apparently, she'd seen his prickly nature as some sort of defense mechanism for repressed trauma and had set out to comfort him. She'd learned early on that he was an ass well before the emotional trauma, but that still didn't stop her. Shoji was a different case. He'd stuck to them like glue after their initial meeting. When neither of them had immediately run away or screamed "monster" to him, he asked if they could be friends. It was honestly sad that he set the bar so low, but the two of them were quick to make the multi-armed boy feel welcomed. Bakugo was an asshole, not heartless. These were all completely normal ways to make friends. "Are you sure you two have had enough to eat this morning? I've heard that the entrance exam can be quite demanding. You'll need all the energy that you can get." Bakugo rolled his eyes. It sounded like Auntie Inko was trying to fatten his totally not friends up before a hard day's work, again. "No thank you, Kiro. We already ate enough." Sue politely declined. She then turned her attention to the grumpy little Pomeranian walking past them. "Good morning, Bakugo." Bakugo responded with a grunt and a lazy wave. Shoji opted for a simple nod that he returned in kind. He made his way to the kitchen to grab breakfast. A single energy bar. Chocolate brownie flavor. Perfect. He ate the whole thing in 2 bites and continued on to the front door. "You got everything you need, brat?" his mother asked. "Of course, you hag." He snapped back. Neither Sue nor Shoji so much as flinched as the two bickered. Once upon a time, the two of them had balked when they'd heard him talk to his own mother like that. Their jaws practically smashed through the floor when they'd heard her reply in the same manner. But over the years, they'd become desensitized to the chaos. Bakugo was starting to think that they honestly might be enjoying it. "There'll be plenty of time later for the two of you to give us all hearing loss," Hisashi mediated, "but these kids have an entrance exam to get to, so." Masaru was quick to seize the opportunity to prevent another shouting match. "You're absolutely right. Better to be there an hour early than a minute late. Now, on you go, you three." As his father started to push them out the door, Inko swiftly moved in to intercept. She took Bakugo off to the side and in the most gentle, most loving, most heart-wrenching way possible, she whispered to him. "Izuku would have been so happy for you." Izuku sneezed. Will looked over to him. "You okay, boss?" "Yeah. I feel," he trailed off. Izuku intended to look his teammate in the eye to assure him, but something else caught his attention. "May, this is a reconnaissance mission." Her face scrunched up in confusion, though her hands stayed busy as she gathered the rest of her equipment. Yeah? I kind of knew that already." Without even looking up from his own gear, Hitoshi was able to clarify. "What he means is, why are you packing a rocket launcher?" "Micro-rocket launcher," May retorted. "It's not like I grabbed a SPNKR or anything. Besides, I have my reasons. All of you read the AAR." Indeed, Fireteam Legacy's AAR, or After Action Report, had been quite clear about the misgivings towards their gear. Apparently, the villain they faced had a quirk that could rearrange the molecules on his skin into a carbon structure that repelled all of their weapons. That, coupled with his impressive strength and the fact that there was enough trigger in his body to kill a full-grown bull, meant that he was quite the opponent. If it hadn't been for their augmentations, Legacy would have actually been in trouble. Those at the commission agreed. They advised every team to start packing a more versatile armament for any new mission. Nothing was off limits. High-caliber rifles, 8-gauge shotguns, grenade launchers, and anything else in the armory. Every last item was now officially at their disposal. All they had to do was walk up to the quartermaster, ask politely, and it was theirs. Will said something along the lines of Christmas coming early, though Izuku thought that the phrase, open season, was more apt of a description. Dr. Halsey decided to take it one step further. She and all of the other scientists at the commission had been working alongside the one and only David Shield to produce top-of-the-line equipment for them. His role in the Spartan program was being kept under wraps for the time being. Actually, Izuku was pretty sure that if they got their way, word of All Might's former sidekick's assistance would never see the light of day. The commission didn't try to keep Dr. Shield's involvement a secret from the Spartans, however, they were instructed to keep their mouths shut around him. Despite all the help he'd been providing, he was still in the dark about the more clandestine aspects of the program. Nevertheless, Dr. Halsey had convinced the scientist, and pretty much everyone she talked to, that only the absolute best would be acceptable. Dr. Shield thus delivered. In truth, most of what they already had access to could be considered overkill, but Izuku wasn't one to turn down advanced equipment produced by the brightest minds of Island. Several prototype weapon systems, high-explosive armor-piercing, HEAP, ammunition, hyper-dense mono-molecular combat knives, jetpacks, threat sensors, arc grenades, and numerous modifications to their SPI armor. Despite all that, both doctors had insisted that the best had yet to come. Everything they'd received was actually just the first part of a much larger resupply operation that Dr. Halsey and the others had been planning. Needless to say, Izuku and all of the other Spartans were eagerly awaiting to see what else might be on the way. Especially those like May, who'd taken to modifying everything they could get their hands on. Besides, it's not like that's the only thing I've got. I still have my primary and sidearm, May continued. I just want to bring the Hydra along in case we find ourselves in a situation. Izuku had a hard time disagreeing with that sentiment. Try as they might, they'd never come up with a plan that was perfectly foolproof. Mendez-sensei's lecture about Murphy's Law had been playing through everyone's head for the past few weeks now. If something can go wrong, trust me, it will. With that in mind, Izuku decided to take this moment of safety they currently had to talk to his friends. There wasn't a whole lot of that when they were on a mission. Any particular reason you grabbed the Hydra, or did you just want to play with the lock-on feature? May shrugged. A little bit of both. I've been messing around with the targeting and tracking system. I think that, with enough time, I can add a feature that makes it optically tracking, kind of like a tow missile. Optical tracking. That could turn out to be incredibly useful. The missile would follow wherever they were aiming their sights at. It'd be a bonus to have such a feature on such a portable weapon system. Any particular reason why? Hitoshi asked. He'd finished examining the dual M6D magnums he'd become acquainted with and was now checking out his BR-55 battle rifle. I mean, is an automatic, heat-seeking missile launcher not enough on its own? There was a manic gleam in May's eyes as she turned to regard Hitoshi. Why settle for the standard when there's always room for improvements? See, we'll cut in. This is why the commission's afraid to reveal us to the public. Hitoshi scoffed, May grunted, and Izuku let out a hefty sigh. It was a topic that all the Spartans had been discussing for a while now. When would they be revealed to the world? Some of them were excited at the possibility of interacting with the public, whereas others were savoring every day that they could stay hidden amongst the shadows. Izuku found that he was on the fence regarding the issue. On one hand, he wanted to step into the light and show the world that stronger heroes were among them, protecting them from the threats they couldn't possibly predict. On the other hand, they'd lose a great deal of their animosity, which would directly impact their fighting efforts against the MLA. For the best, as far as I'm concerned, said Hitoshi. Indeed. Our psychological warfare efforts have proven to be extremely effective, May argued. It's been confirmed that villains are turning themselves over to the authorities at the mere mention of Spartans being in the area. We can continue to give the bad guys nightmares and stand as a beacon of hope for the people of the world, countered Izuku. They're not mutually exclusive. Will nodded his head in agreement, while May put a hand to her chin to contemplate this new proposition. Hitoshi's lip twitched into a small frown, but that was all he offered. Izuku gave him one of his patented, blinding the sun smiles to cheer him up, Besides, with all this new gear that the doctors have been giving us, I'm sure we'll be able to fill any gaps that show up. Hey, that reminds me, you remember that super secret surprise that Dr. Halsey promised us? Asked Will. Well, I was talking with Saren the other day and she was able to hear one of the docs say something along the lines of Project Mjolnir. What do you think? Izuku didn't have the slightest idea what that could mean. The look of utter confusion on Hitoshi's face told him that his friend was in the same boat. I'm still set on the idea that it's some sort of VTOL, May replied. Warthogs and armored vans are nice, but you just can't compete with good old-fashioned air superiority. I mean, other hero agencies have their own dedicated aircraft, why wouldn't we? Especially ones that have some teeth on them. We'd have to be cleared to fly over Japan's airspace, Izuku pointed out. You really think that'll be a problem for the organization that's already invested possibly billions of yen into the training of child hero soldiers? Or all of the accompanying military purpose weapons and equipment? Hitoshi deadpanned. Well, not when you put it like that, Izuku said. Their conversation was cut short by the sound of someone bursting into the room and proclaiming their arrival. Heroes of the great and reckless mythic team. Heed me. I bring earth-shattering news. Hello, Hawks, Izuku called out. The others chimed in with their own hays and highs. They felt no need to snap to and give him their full undivided attention like some of the other commission agents. Even if he wasn't a Spartan, Hawks was one of them. Their winged friend didn't skip so much as a beat as walked over to sit right in the middle of the four teammates. We're just about to head out for our next assignment, Hitoshi explained. Catch you on the flip side? Ah, but that's precisely why I'm here, sorry, munchkins. Hawks said in a tone that wasn't apologetic in the slightest. Your old mission just got handed off to another team. Never fear, though, for I need you for something 1,000 times more exciting. February 15, 2168-101 Aizawa had to admit, the prospect of finding the so-called demon heroes of the commission had him on edge. From his connections in both the underground hero community and the police force, he'd been able to construct a general idea of what he should expect when he finds them. Huge, intimidating, reclusive, and most notably, armed to the teeth. Several of the officers that had met them in person had explained that the heroes looked like they were better geared to fight a war rather than the average drug runner. But it was the eyewitness accounts from the villains themselves that really intrigued Aizawa. I swear, they were invisible. I knew they were there. I could smell something, but I couldn't see them anywhere. All it took was one punch and I was out. It felt like I'd gotten hit by a train. From what the doctors saw, they said that wasn't too far off. They butchered us, man. Between their aim and their freaking Karate Kid martial arts moves, it was nothing short of a slaughter. They were so fast, I didn't understand what was going on. I shit you not, it happened in the blink of an eye. We never stood a chance. Nezu was convinced that they were using some sort of active camouflage system that was often used by special forces around the world. Same went with the strength. There were actually quite a few powered exoskeletons that had been patented. Some were even commercially available. Their skills could be written off as some sort of training, but the thing that had been perplexing him the most was their apparent reflexes. In short, it was off the charts. Which wouldn't be so surprising if it weren't for the fact that every single one of them shared this ability. Not even Nezu had a viable theory for how they'd acquired this. With all of that in mind, Aizawa knew the only way to get through the night without being put into a full body cast was to be as cooperative and non-aggressive as possible. He had to let them know that he was on their side, that he was a fellow pro. But if things did take a turn for the worse, well, it was best to make sure that it didn't come to that. His quirk didn't work on exosuits, after all. But that didn't mean his senses were any less valuable, especially his hearing. Aizawa stayed perfectly still as he called out to the figure behind him. I hope I didn't give you any bad impressions. If you had, then I wouldn't have bothered getting this close to you, said Hawks. The young hero hovered lazily a few meters away. With his laid-back posture and easygoing tone of voice, the average citizen might think that the wing hero had simply flown over to have a nice chat. Aizawa knew better. Besides, Hawks continued. You're a fellow pro. I don't imagine you mean any ill will. There was definitely some implication there, but even for the sake of his own life, Aizawa couldn't determine what exactly it was. He took extreme care to not startle the number 3 hero as he turned around to face him. Of course not. Just wanted to get a good look at the new kids on the block. The fake smile that Hawks had quickly turned into a frighteningly real one. They're something else, aren't they? I've never seen anything like it, Aizawa admitted. If it was just 1 or 2 of them, I'd be able to write it off as another undercover hero employed by the commission. But this? No way. Hawks merely hummed in approval. Aizawa would make sure to let Nedzu know that he was right. The guy did share some sort of bond with the others. Time to see if they could use that. He let the silence linger for a few more seconds, then trudged on. You know what I want. Hawk's smile was positively dripping with arrogance. Well, duh. It's what everyone wants. A chance to meet the demons of the commission. Only question is. He flew a few meters closer, though stayed at his elevated position. Why do you want to meet them? Aizawa mentally prepared himself for this next part. Deception might not have been his forte, but he knew that the best lies had aspects of truth in them. I want to understand what makes them so effective. Their skills, their physical prowess, their synergy. It's out of this world. I'm a teacher. I don't want to see my students simply do good. I want to see them excel. If they can catch even a glimmer of any of that, then the next generation of heroes will undoubtedly be leaps and bounds beyond what we have today. The third greatest hero in all of Japan took in a great, big breath, then stuck out his tongue and blew a raspberry. Yeah, that was really convincing. I've had scam calls about limited warranties for a car I don't even own that were more authentic. Aizawa would deny that the pro's reaction had thrown him for a loop. It wasn't that he believed Hawks would immediately trust him and spill everything he knew, just. Damn, he really hadn't planned this out well, had he? He realized that none of his prefabricated reasons would work. In order to pull this off, Aizawa would need to tread carefully. Deception was a fine art. An art that he'd never had to use on anything more than a class of impressionable teenagers. This was going to be interesting. All right. The truth, then, I'm worried. There was no change to Hawk's posture, but the subtle arc of his brow told Aizawa what he needed to know. Go on. These new demons, Aizawa drawled, or whatever it is they're really called. They're different, and I don't mean in the sense that they have fancy armor, or special training, or are carrying enough weapons and ammo to fry half a city. Even though that's all another point in itself. It's their attitude. He'd now fully secured Hawk's attention. The signs hadn't been in his smile, rather, it was in his eyes this time. Gone was the tranquil curiosity they'd previously possessed. Now, they bore a fierce scrutiny that could only be attributed to a bird of prey sizing up its quarry. Aizawa remained steadfast and pushed forward. It's not uncommon for a hero to break a couple of punks' bones or put a few new holes in them, but your colleagues have taken to violence like a duck to water. The way they handle villains, hey, they could give Endeavor a run for his money. I haven't heard of them working with anyone but you. They ruthlessly put down their opposition, and they're always on the move from one target to the next. Their minds are completely and unwaveringly focused on the task at hand. And that gets me thinking, why train them this way? Why train them to be so vicious? Why train them to be so relentless? They don't act like your average underground hero, patrolling their usual routes and taking down drug runners. Now, it was Aizawa who was moving forward. It was at a careful and steady pace, but he needed to drive his point in. They act like they're soldiers at war. In reality, he was pulling all of this out of his ass. He had to admit, though, that as Hawks hadn't immediately laughed at his face like he did last time, there could be some validity to what he was saying. Which was unimaginably terrifying to think about. Neither he nor Nedzu had stopped to consider that the demons were the Commission's response to a serious threat they'd discovered. Or maybe the rat bear thing had thought of this and simply neglected to inform the person who was currently sticking his neck out for the cause about such speculations. It wouldn't be the first time. Whoa, was the wing hero's response. He'd raised one of his eyebrows about halfway into Aizawa's explanation, and then raised the other one towards the end. It appeared that he'd impressed him. I'm impressed. Called it, Aizawa thought. All right, Hawks said slowly. All right, you've obviously been doing some homework. Tell you what. Hawks seemed to be mulling over his next words. The fact that he was taking the time to formulate an actual answer versus just saying the first thing to come to mind was far more concerning than it had any right to be. Especially when Aizawa realized that they weren't the only ones up on this rooftop. Being aware of your surroundings was something the homeroom teacher tried to impress upon his students as early as possible, so it'd be kind of hypocritical of him to not practice what he preached. It was still unsettling how long it took for him to notice their presence. Hawks reacquired a piece of Aizawa's very much divided attention by clicking his tongue. How about we ask them? The nothingness that Aizawa knew for a fact wasn't nothingness had collectively decided against speaking to him. Who would have guessed? Ah, shucks, Hawks smudged smugly. Looks like they just haven't warmed up to you yet. That's all right, though, I know just how to remedy that. Aizawa wasn't sure how he knew, but there was absolutely no doubt in his mind that Nedzu had, in some way, expected this. The little rat was probably counting on it, actually. Hawks flew the last meter or so of space between them, then dropped onto his feet and put his arm around Aizawa's shoulders in a friendly gesture. All you've got to do is show them that you can be trusted, and what better way to do that than getting in my good graces? There were a couple of leaps in logic being overlooked here, but Aizawa had decided that he was now, officially, too tired to care. Hang with me for a few weeks and I guarantee they'll see that you aren't just some stick in the mud. Here. The wing hero pulled out a pen and a slightly crumpled piece of paper from his jacket. He wrote something down, then gave it to Aizawa. That's my number. Do you need mine? Nah, I'll find you when I want to. Outstanding. Well, I'm beat. I think I'm gonna call it a night and head back home. Oh, but don't worry, Eraserhead. I'm sure Mythic Team won't mind escorting you back home. It was the most intensely uneventful walk home that he'd ever had. Author's note. Izuku, Mythic 1 Hitoshi, Mythic 2. May, Mythic 3 Will, Mythic 4 Chapter 15. February 28, 2168 1400 Aizawa Shota, otherwise known as Eraserhead, the Erasure Hero. His quirk, Erasure, gave him the ability to stop people from using their own quirks by looking at them, provided it's not a mutant type. There's no limit to how many quirks he can erase, though it does reset every time he blinks. He's 30 years old, 183 centimeters tall, and approximately 77 kilograms. Although quite the exceptional underground hero, his current occupation placed him full-time at the prestigious UA Hero Academy in Musutafu, Japan. Local police forces would still request his aid in certain cases due to his expertise. Izuku reread the entire document to look for anything that might have escaped him. He didn't have to. His augmentations granted him the ability to consume and process information at a rate far above the average human, even in this modern age of quirks. But his training demanded that he double and triple check himself. Every detail they found opened the door to a dozen new opportunities on how to solve a problem. That's why he was sifting through every form of intelligence on Eraserhead that he could get his hands on. News articles and police records were good, though having a professionally crafted file on each pro hero in all of Japan did absolute wonders. Since everyone in the country had to go through the HPSC in order to obtain their license, they developed extensive portfolios on all of them. Especially over the past few years, when they discovered the threat of the MLA. After Hawks practically guaranteed that they'd be seeing Eraserhead again, Izuku intended to memorize every available piece of data they had on him. It was a situation which had been met with concern by some at the commission. So do you like to live on the edge or do you just enjoy giving all of us fucking heart attacks? A commission agent asked. I like to think of it as taking the initiative, Hawks responded coolly. Apparently, he'd, once again, taken some liberties that weren't granted to him. How shocking. Hawks, please, try to acknowledge Agent Inoue's concerns, Yokomiru Mera asked. Officially, he was Hawks' handler, what that translated to was playing damage control for the wing hero. The board had already reprimanded him thoroughly, but there were other commission personnel, mostly agents, who still wanted to give him a piece of their minds. Not everyone is privy to your unorthodox methods. Izuku knows that had their favorite resident pro-hero been a Spartan, the word insubordination would have been circling around the commission. But that was just one more difference between Hawks and them. Despite all the missions they did together, he technically wasn't under the commission's command structure. He was supposed to be an independent entity. Of course, this wasn't truly the case. Hawks still relied heavily on the funds the HPSC provided him with. Not just that, but he was given access to all of their supplies, intelligence, and safehouses. That being said, Hawks is allowed to operate with far more autonomy than they did. He could go on whatever mission he wanted with as little of a reason as, because I was in the area. He was allowed to run his own agency and hire his own staff and sidekicks so long as they were first vetted by the commission. Sure, Spartans were allowed some leeway when they were in the field, but there were still parameters that had been established. No communicating with individuals outside the commission unless absolutely necessary. When talking with someone, they had to confirm their identification and ensure their security clearance level was high enough to ensure they didn't discuss classified topics. No interacting with the public. That meant they weren't allowed to take photos or give autographs. None of it really bothered Izuku. If Control said, "Jump," he'd ask, "How high?" As far as he was concerned, these were necessary precautions. Loose lips sink ships, as Mendez-sensei explained. The only part that irked him was how they couldn't interact with the public. But that was certain to change once they were officially revealed. You were supposed to keep him off our backs, and yet, somehow, you've done the complete opposite. The plan had been simply enough. Eraserhead had been tracking the Spartans throughout the Shizuoka prefecture for weeks now. Control had decided to send an agent, alongside a team of Spartans, to confront the pro about. They'd intimidate him into leaving them alone. Though if that failed, then they'd drop some misleading information in an attempt to send him on a wild goose chase. It'd give Control time to come up with a more definitive way of dealing with him. When Hawks had heard of this, he'd immediately volunteered. The troublemaker in question let out a groan, but he seemed to decide against antagonizing the agent anymore. I already told this to the board. Eraserhead is way too valuable to just give him the runaround. He's got experience and he's also got influence. The guy might be camera shy, but you'll have a hard time finding a pro who doesn't respect him. Yeah, that's great and all, but you seem to be forgetting that his boss is the rat himself. Ah, yes. There was one other thing concerning Eraserhead. One particularly crucial detail that Dr. Halsey and the board of directors themselves impressed upon all of Fireteam Mythic as soon as they returned to headquarters. He was in direct contact with the principal of UA, Nezu. From his file, Nezu was a creature of unspecified origin, though the term chimera was used in several instances throughout the document. He was barely taller than Izuku's knees and his weight was negligible. He posed little harm in terms of physical confrontations, however, that wasn't the reason why the commission was so wary of him. His quirk, high specs, enhanced his intelligence and perception to a point that was unmatched in all of Japan. Possibly the entire world. Now, despite all that, the average person didn't have to worry. In fact, Japan undeniably benefited from Nezu. His talent has been focused exclusively on the development of new heroes at his academy, and it shows. More than half of the top 100 heroes on the Billboard chart are alumni of UA. Not a figure to scoff at, for sure. There was one problem. Nezu held a certain amount of animosity for just about every form of authority. In some cases, it was more along the lines of outright antagonism. The HPSC had taken measures to avoid becoming a part of the latter, since having the smartest being on this side of the planet hate your guts wouldn't help their continued existence. Dr. Halsey said that in no uncertain terms that the Spartans were to keep every possible detail of their background a secret. When it came to the principal of UA, they were simply told to avoid him at all costs. They weren't afraid about his involvement with the MLA. In fact, all of their information concluded that there was no way he, or any of his staff, would support the organization. No, The board was afraid that even the slightest peep from any of them would clue the principal into the origin of the Spartans. It was as if they feared that just being within eyesight of Nezu would tell him everything he wanted to know. Honestly, says Hawks, I think that just sweetens the deal. Oh, for fuck's sake, you are just a madman, aren't you? Noticing how the conversation was only devolving, Izuku decided to speak up. Agent Inoue. The agent spared one more glare at Hawks before giving the young Spartan his undivided attention. Sir? It was still strange, working alongside the agents. He didn't know them as well as his Spartans, or even the instructors for that matter. The interactions between the two groups had been awkward, to say the least. Some of them were able to get along easily enough, like Will, while others did their absolute best to avoid them, like Jay. Until more time had passed and they were more comfortable with one another, Izuku decided he'd keep it professional. Of course, he'd learned that smiling could help ease tensions, so he gave the agent the most well-meaning smile he could muster as he spoke. It's best to stay calm when talking with Hawks. He enjoys making you suffer. Inoue went quiet for a while after listening to him. Then he cleared his throat. I understand, sir. Hawks, I like to. With a roll of his eyes, Hawks cut him off. Yeah, whatever. Thanks for ruining the fun, Izuku. Look, we're going to have to interact with UA at some point. Whether that be Nezu, the staff, or their students. It's inevitable. Because of that, I think we ought to make the best of it. UA has a lot to offer us in this fight. Sure, we'll have to be cautious. We don't want any sensitive information getting out, obviously. But they have some absolute legends over there. The Spartans are strong, but wouldn't it be nice to have some backup? If his widened eyes were anything to go by, then Agent Inoue seemed to finally understand now. He quickly, though sincerely, apologized to Hawks and went back to working on whatever case he'd been researching before they'd come in. Izuku could have stopped this long ago had he just ordered the agent to drop it. Any of the Spartans in the recreation room could have. In terms of hierarchy, they outrank all but the most senior of agents. It wasn't a good idea to have a young and inexperienced junior operator in control of a team of hyper-lethal hero soldiers. But he didn't want to cause any friction between the two groups by pulling rank whenever there was a scuffle. Instead, he'd opted to wait and let them talk it out, albeit with a few nudges in the right direction. After a few moments, Hawks and Mera took a seat at the table where Izuku was. The other members of Fireteam Mythic were scattered amongst the room. Hitoshi was playing a hand of cards with Fireteam Legacy, Mei was modifying the new devices they'd been given at a temporary workbench, and Will was chatting and spotting for a different agent while he lifted weights. They'd been ordered to take some time off after 5 days straight of successful missions and patrols. Contrary to what the Commission wanted the larger populace to believe, Spartans did require rest. They simply didn't need as much as a normal person. Izuku found that he could go days without sleep and still operate at peak efficiency. It was just another facet of their augmentations. How'd suspension go? Izuku asked. I've been through this song and dance with them a dozen times over, Hawks grumbled. They put me in timeout for a few days, make me promise to be on my best behavior, and then throw me back out into the jungle. They'll never sideline me for long, though. I'm too good at getting results. Mera went to correct him, but immediately stopped upon realizing that what he'd said was essentially the truth. He slumped back into his chair and decided to allow the conversation to play out. Izuku chose to hum in agreement. So, when are we meeting Eraserhead again? Tonight, if I get my way. Would you be up for it? Always. Let me check with the rest of the team. Mythic, form up. They each made their excusals and hurried over. What's the situation, boss? Will asked. Hawks wants us to go on a mission tonight with his new pal, Eraserhead. How do you all feel about cutting our R and RA a little short? Their grins were infectious. I think you've got your answer, said Izuku. I didn't expect anything less, Hawks said, and remember. There was a hint of sincerity in his tone that few ever witnessed. Let me do all the talking. Without a doubt, he's going to report everything that happens tonight back to Principal Nezu. February 28, 2168-2030 Eraserhead. Gosh, it's been too long, man, Hawks said cheerfully. Aizawa noticed that the smile he had this time was genuine from the start. In fact, it appeared to be far more amiable than the wild-looking one he'd had last time. This immediately put him on edge. I guess, he replied in a dull manner. Oh, don't be like that. You're the one that wanted to hang out, after all. Actually, he hadn't wanted to hang out at all. The only reason he was indulging the mischievous little shit was because it was the best lead he had for his investigation. Also, because if Nezu was correct, which he normally was, then the hero in front of him had been sold to the commission by his parents like some sort of prize animal. Before he was even 10 years old. He might be a pain in the ass, but Aizawa figured that he could cut the guy some slack. Yeah, I did. So then, what's the plan? The plan? Can't we just take the time to chat? You know, catch up with one another? Ask how the kids are, how's work going, if we've done anything interesting. Neither of us have kids. I have to deal with hundreds of hormonal, angsty teenagers on a daily basis, and I had to sit through a 4-hour-long meeting with the newest staff member who, in my personal opinion, doesn't have nearly enough of the qualifications required for his role. Is All Might really that bad? Of course you guys already know who our secret teacher is. I mean, it was kind of obvious, as long as you know what to look for. He's been cutting back on hero work, like, a lot. Whenever he's been out and about for the past year or two, it's almost always been around the Musutafu area. The place which happens to be the location of his alma mater. And he's already alerted the commission that he's planning to semi-retire in order to pursue a new career, Hawks explained. When you put all of it together, then, well, it sorta just makes sense. Yeah. It sure does, Aizawa agreed lazily. Between the aforementioned oaf of a new teacher and the sporadic children he had to wrangle, he was already wiped out. Look, can we just get back to the topic at hand? It's been a long week. Golden eyes pierced into his own with a slightly disturbing amount of intrigue. Oh, what the hell? The best friendships are usually formed through adventure, anyway. Come on, I'll show you where we're going. The others are already there. The demons? You know that's not what they're called, right? Well, it's not like the commission has acknowledged their existence yet, so we don't really have anything else to go with. Point. The two of them continued to travel along the rooftops for a few beats of silence, until... Spartans. They're called Spartans. Aizawa kept his eyes forward, still moving, as he questioned the other pro-hero. Why the hell would you just tell me that? Aren't you supposed to be making me work for the answers or something? You are working for them. You're taking time out of your day to deal with my bullshit after you yourself just explained how shitty of a week it's been. Besides, it's not that big of a reveal. The commission knows that they won't be able to keep them hidden forever. They'll announce them here in the next year or two. I figured it wouldn't hurt if I spoiled the surprise for you. Okay. What the hell is your angle? Why are you even humoring me with all of this? Isn't that what friends do? Hawks asked cheekily. Aizawa scowled. We're not, sir. His mouth slammed shut as he almost tripped over himself. Not even a meter away from the teacher, a Spartan was crouched in the shadows. Their sci-fi-looking golden visor was staring right at him. Where the hell did he come from? It took him a few moments to remember Nezu's theory about active camouflage. The Spartan continued where he left off, this time more softly. I'll need you to keep your voice down. We don't want to let anyone know we're here. Villain or civilian. Hawks watched their interaction with a maniacal cheer. In a hushed tone he called out. Eraserhead, I thought you teachers didn't encourage shouting while in class. It's best if you use your inside voice here. Despite his immense efforts, Aizawa was unable to glare a hole into the wing hero's head. He shifted his focus. Sorry, Mythic Team? He was fairly certain that was what Hawks had called them at the end of their last meeting. It wasn't that odd to have a group name. There were plenty of heroes who went by their team names along with individual hero names. The Wild Pussycats were one such group. Nevertheless, the crouching giant stayed silent. That's them, all right, Hawks confirmed. Don't be so cold, Mythic. Go ahead and say hello. One by one, the teacher was able to make out the rest of the team. However, the other three weren't paying any attention to him. They were looking out into the distance, all in different directions. It seemed like they were keeping watch despite how calm the night was. There wasn't sight nor sound of trouble anywhere near them, and yet they were unwaveringly focused on maintaining discipline. I guess that's what happens when your childhood is replaced with a decade of non-stop training, he thought. Nezu theorized that if their situation was anything like Hawks, then the Spartans had been taken somewhere around the age of 8. From there, they'd undergo some, as of yet, unknown regimen to become the absolute juggernauts that they were. Once they'd reached adulthood, they were sent off into the world to become the Commission's boogeymen. The green and gold bulbous helmet of the first Spartan stayed trained on Hawks for a few more seconds before it turned to regard him. It reminded him of the outfit used by his fellow hero, 13, though far sleeker and more dangerous looking. Aizawa thought they might have been male, but it was hard to tell from their voice alone due to him using the speakers of his helmet. He didn't say anything this time, though. Instead, the Spartan held up 2 fingers and dragged them horizontally across his visor, near where his mouth likely was. Hand signals. He thought. What the hell have they been teaching them? It's how they say hello. Kind of. Think of it as their way of expressing happiness. He couldn't just say that. They're pretty strict about staying silent while on a mission. Plus, it's kind of hard to read body language under all that armor. Yeah, I guess that makes sense, he grumbled. So, are you gonna tell me the plan now? The wing hero's smile grew by an order of magnitude. Oh, it's simple. We're gonna start small tonight and do a little nightly patrol of the ward. Standard hero stuff. Knock around a few thugs, catch a purse snatcher or 2, scare a graffiti artist, and all that other good stuff. Think of it as one of your team building exercises you organize in your classes. A way for us to get to know each other while still keeping it professional. Got it in one. Now on to the important stuff. Getting to know your new partners. After all, it's for the best that you know who you're talking to. He pointed towards the Spartan who'd greeted the teacher earlier. He was still staring at the 2 of them. Silently, motionlessly. Is he even breathing? That's their leader, Mythic One. You can tell who he is because he's the shorty of the group. That's their hero names? Their team and a number? Spartans are more along the lines of agents than pros. At least, for the moment. We'll cross that line once they're officially announced. Odd, but certainly not the strangest thing he'd come across regarding the new heroes. Anyway, next up is that guy there, Mythic 2. The only real way to tell him apart from the rest is the set of hand cannons he's sporting. He's also the most standoffish of the group. He wanted to say that every Spartan had been noted as being standoffish, but opted for simply humming in acknowledgement. Mythic 3 is the tech gal. She's the one carrying a crap ton of gear, grenades, rocket launchers, threat sensors, and enough other gizmos to supply an army. Did he say rocket launchers? Aizawa was easily able to identify her. True to Hawk's word, her armor was covered in pouches filled with spare magazines and all other sorts of tech with unknown purposes. Then there's the big guy. The really big guy. That's Mythic 4. Can't miss him. Out of the corner of his eye, Aizawa noticed the Spartans moving. They rose to their full heights and he had to admit that it was impressive. The smallest of them, Mythic 1, stood a dozen centimeters taller than UA's largest staff member. At least until All Might officially joins in April. Mythic 4 was a different story. He towered over Aizawa and Hawks. There was no doubt in his mind that the giant could probably look the number 1 hero in the eyes. Their leader nodded at Hawks, who nodded back. Then the 4 of them took off into the night. Just a few more shadows against the backdrop of the city as they leapt from building to building. The 2 pros were quick to follow their lead and catch up. Aizawa was able to track them for a little while, but after a while they practically turned invisible. He had to rely on Hawks to guide him to wherever they were going. Whether he was actually able to see them or his golden visor had some sort of feature that allowed him to view the team, Aizawa wasn't sure. Well, that confirms Nezu's active camouflage theory. They're good, He complimented. It was proving to be a hell of a workout to keep up, but he'd pushed himself harder plenty of times before. Besides, traversing rooftops just so happened to be a speciality of his. Hawks scoffed. Well, that's an understatement. I hope all these skills I've been hearing about are helping in some form. Have there been any casualties among them? Haven't you been watching the news? Spartans are invincible, he quietly exclaimed. They slap bullets out of the air, jump over buildings, and can kill a person just by looking at them. Okay, fine, maybe that last one wasn't true, he said languidly. Aizawa shuddered. What? Then the hero turned to the teacher with an earnest expression. But believe me, they're still head and shoulders above almost everyone else out there. Aizawa noticed this shift in demeanor and tried to capitalize on it. You seem pretty proud of them. It's just the truth, friend. I'm glad to be on the same side as them. Anyone who isn't, well, I almost feel sorry for them. They're that strong? Oh yeah, he drawled. Stronger than All Might? Individually, no, but if you get enough of them together, they'll accomplish anything. And just how many of them are there? Hawks merely put his hands on his hips and raised an eyebrow at Aizawa. You're asking too many questions, was what it implied. Or perhaps he wasn't asking the right ones. There's enough, the wing hero remarked. I imagine that they're all pretty unique, huh? Well, they each have their own ways of standing out, he said fondly. What about them? Mythic team. What makes them stand out? He asked. This was something that Aizawa was familiar with. It was like talking about students with the other teachers. Every year had their fair share of unique individuals. The gifted ones, the competitive ones, the problem children, the ones who needed help, and on it went. It was a normal topic in the teacher's lounge. Gremlins, he muttered. What was that? I said their teamwork is something else. I mean, every team is incredible, but they each bring something special to the table, you know? Phenomenal leadership, creative problem solving, and combat skills are only the beginning. From bleeding hearts and mad scientists to walking tanks and government-sponsored sociopaths, they've got the whole gambit. Aizawa knew that he should have been worried about that last one, but he'd met his fair share of unique pro-heroes. Every last one of them was worth their weight in gold, so he figured he'd let it slide here too. He was nearly content to let the golden-haired hero continue speaking. After all, he'd heard similar things said by almost every teacher he'd met. They all had a group of students that they couldn't help gushing about. However, there was one thing he'd noticed had been left out. No mention of their quirks? Hawks huffed. I don't always agree with the eggheads at the commission, but they are right about something. Our generation's too reliant on quirks. Don't get me wrong, they're a treasure for sure, but teamwork and the right skill set can overcome any obstacle. Quirks are just another tool in their arsenal. He was surprised. Aizawa agreed that quirks weren't everything to being a pro, but the commission had a record for scoping out people with powerful ones that they could exploit. Hell, Hawks was a living testament to their obsession. So, what was the change? Is that so? His lips formed into a dark smile. You'll be seeing them in action tonight. Why don't you let me know what you think after all's said and done? I'm certain that. The hero cut himself off as his hand snapped to the earpiece of his headset. Aizawa realized that he must have been using it to communicate with the Spartans. He was silent for a second. Then a wicked smile formed upon his face. We've got something. Come on, let's go. Hawks took off in a flash and Aizawa kicked it into high gear. He could hear his heart pounding in his ears as the adrenaline surged through his body. It was time to see the Spartans in action. Hawks swooped down out of his vision, likely going towards the streets. Aizawa followed suit and leapt off the side of the building. He snapped his capture scarf out to the side where it latched onto the railings of a fire escape. Descending at a far less dangerous pace allowed him to view the scene in its entirety. Hawks and the Spartans had already engaged a group of villains who'd seemed to be in the middle of mugging a couple. Mythic 2 and 3 had taken to acting like human shields and placed themselves between the civilians and the fight. Mythic 1 and 4 were, in the meantime, beating the absolute hell out of the thugs. One of the goons was lying face down on the concrete. a knife held loosely in his hand and blood oozing from a nasty wound on his head. Another was in the process of being flung across the alleyway after taking a devastating kick right to the sternum from their leader. The distinct crack of bones being snapped was impossible to miss. As Aizawa's feet touched the ground, he was able to see the final two villains attempt to make a break for it. One of them transformed their legs into springs and leapt a dozen meters away, while the other formed their hands into a pair of organic ice picks and started darting up the side of the building. In response, the teacher activated his quirk. The spring villain's legs returned to normal mid-jump, causing him to smack face first into the pavement of the street. The icepick villain suffered a similar fate and fell flat on her back from a height of several meters. Mythic 1 and 4 sprinted to them and quickly handcuffed the would-be muggers. Aizawa took a moment to get his breathing under control. With the excitement over, he was able to notice that something was missing. Or someone. You could have helped apprehend those last two. Would have made it a lot less painful, the teacher called out to the golden-haired hero above him. Well, sure, but then you guys wouldn't have had that prime bonding experience, Hawks replied. I mean, that was clean. The 5 of you are working like a team already. Aizawa sighed. The Spartans remained silent. The couple started sobbing and thanking them profusely. Police sirens could be heard in the distance as they made their way towards them. This is gonna be a long night, he groaned. It was around an hour before the group was able to start moving again. Just more of the routine cleanup process where they hand the villains off to the police, give them their report of the incident, and console the young couple. Though that last part was mostly handled by Hawks and Eraserhead. And wasn't that a concept Hitoshi remembered years ago when he wanted nothing more than to meet his all-time favorite hero, Eraserhead? Well, he'd gone above and beyond in that department. The young Spartan had worked alongside the man to take down a group of villains and save a couple of civilians. Wasn't that something? Alas, he couldn't allow such sentiment to distract him. They still had a lot more ground to cover before the end of the night. As soon as the police had dismissed them, the group was off in search of anywhere else they might be needed. However, it was turning out to be a slow night after the initial attack. They caught a shoplifter, prevented pickpocketing, and stopped someone from getting hit by a car. That's how things were after their reputation spread throughout the country. As soon as all the villains in the area realized that there were Spartans in the area, they crawled back into whatever hideout they had and laid low for a few weeks. That left them to manage minor incidents for the rest of their patrols. Hitoshi remembered the way Dr. Halsey was practically fuming when she learned that the talents of her Spartans were being used to prevent misdemeanors. She'd gone straight to the board and declared that it was a waste of their skills and that they could be used in more productive ways. Yet, Hitoshi never felt bothered by it. Heroes should help out in all aspects of life, both the big and the small. Alas, the night had to come to an end eventually. After seeing Aizawa off, the rest of the group made their way back to the commission base where they were being stationed for the meantime. Normally, Hawks would have said his farewells and taken off for his own residence, but he seemed to be in a far more enthusiastic mood tonight. So, any thoughts on our friend's performance tonight? The wing hero asked. Well, he was dedicated, that's for certain, Izuku said thoughtfully. Despite the pace we were going, he managed to keep up. Not an easy thing to accomplish. That's for sure, agreed Will. I know his file explained that rooftops were his usual method of traveling, but they didn't say anything about how good he is. Not to mention just how useful his quirk can be, May chimed in. It definitely evens the playing field for him, but for us, it's like a walk in the park. Hawks let out a hum, then turned to face Hitoshi. His teammates looked to him as well. With the majority of their armor already off, he could see the subtle expressions of intrigue upon each of their faces. He knew why. They all were aware that Eraserhead was his favorite hero. Even Hawks. Part of him wondered if that was the reason they'd been selected for this operation. The blonde was far more clever than he let on with his little stage persona. Nevertheless, they wanted to know if he still held the pro in the same regard as he did during their earlier years. Hitoshi folded his arms and adopted a frown, acting like all of his hopes and dreams had been turned to ash. He couldn't see them, but he knew that they must have been holding their breath in anticipation. Then he treated them to a small grin. It was nice to finally work with him. Hell yeah. That's 4 for 4, Hawks exclaimed. I'm glad to hear that, Hitoshi, Izuku said with a smile. It's a hell of a way to meet your hero, huh? Mei chuckled. If you ask nicely enough, I think he might still give you an autograph, Will joked. Hitoshi simply rolled his eyes at them and went back to storing his gear. I think I speak for all of us when I say that we're looking forward to working with him again, said Izuku. I think you're right. There's a lot he has to offer. The wing hero was all but glowing with self-satisfaction. What can I say? I call it like I see it. Footsteps alerted all of them, even Hawks, to someone's presence outside the room. When the door opened, the Spartans jumped to attention while Hawks simply stepped back to observe the situation. Dr. Halsey, how can we help you? Izuku asked dutifully. She regarded them with a pleasant smile. It looked like there was a fair bit of pride in it, as well. Stow your gear, Mythic, and meet with Agent Tsutsumi in the motor pool. From there, you'll be transported to Black Site Sigma. Izuku shared a look with Hitsuhi, then turned back to Halsey and tilted his head. Doctor? The board and I have reviewed your work and have come to a decision, she said. You will be among the first to receive the Mjolnir-powered assault armor. Hitoshi raised an eyebrow. Sounds fancy. Oh, a new toy? Mei asked. It's more than some flashy new gadget, Halsey corrected them. With this armor, your combat effectiveness will skyrocket. You'll accomplish things you could only ever dream of. I don't know, Doctor, said Will. I've got quite the imagination. Izuku playfully elbowed his side, then spoke to Halsey in an enthusiastic manner. If anyone can keep a promise like that, it's Dr. Halsey. Thank you, Izuku, she said gratefully. Then her expression turned hollow as she regarded the last occupant in the room, Hawks. Doctor, he replied coolly. They were silent for a moment until Halsey finally spoke again. Thank you for watching them this evening. He leaned against the wall behind him. Always have, always will. She nodded at him, then shifted her focus back towards the team. You better get going now. Don't wait for me. I'll meet you there soon enough. Fireteam Phoenix and I have something. Well, it's really someone that we have to deal with. Don't worry. I'll explain later. Unknown. 2168 unknown time. Stain didn't know where he was. However, he heavily suspected it was related to the Hero Commission on account of his kidnappers. Waking up after being so physically knocked out wasn't a pleasant experience. The sensation of pins and needles was present throughout his entire body, his senses were dulled, and he was Akaguro Chizome, correct. Now fully alert. The woman in front of him had an air of absolute professionalism. Her white lab coat was pristine, her shoulder-length hair immaculate, and the expression she wore firmly stated that she was business first and casual never. He could appreciate that. It kind of reminded him of himself, actually. Though, she didn't look nearly as physically capable as he was. Something that was incredibly trivial on account of the same hulking giants who'd put him here in the first place that were in the room with them. Two of them stood on either side of her, and although Stain didn't bother to look, he could tell that the third one was right behind him. His hands and feet were bound to the metal chair he sat upon. He didn't have any of his old clothes or accessories. For obvious reasons. Instead, he wore a simple gray jumpsuit with a pair of equally simple sneakers. How quaint. That is your name, right? The lab coat lady asked. I don't go by that anymore. Haven't used it in years, he explained. His throat felt scratchy, but he decided against asking for water, not until he understood what was going on here. You'd prefer I call you Stain? HNGH. Very well. You may refer to me as Doctor. And your companions? Classified, for now. Classified. That word rubbed Stain in all the wrong ways. Who are they? Some fancy new enforcers that the commission hired. The gear they've got and the way they act, I'd say they're some kind of mercenary group. Just pretend they aren't here, for the moment. How much did you pay them? That's not how they operate. That's how they all operate, these days, Stain sneered. They're different, she stated. HMPH. I guess, said Stain. They're certainly a fair cut above the usual crowd from what I've seen. I assure you that everything you've witnessed is merely the tip of the iceberg, she replied. Now then, back to the topic at hand. The Commission has quite the case file on you, you know. For several months, you took up the identity of Stendhal and committed yourself to the world of vigilantism. After a run-in with another vigilante group, however, you completely discarded your persona in pursuit of a far more murderous livelihood and became a true villain. Before all that, you lived a peaceful and relatively average life when you enrolled at Saitama Prefecture Private Heroics Academia. You dropped out during your second year after you became disillusioned with your peers' motivations for becoming pros. Fakes, Stain spat. Every last one of them. Indeed, the doctor said offhandedly. Stain was taken aback by her casual agreement, but she continued on. There's an incredible number of pro-heroes in our day and age who've signed up for all the wrong reasons. Mostly fortune and fame. Though the ones we're after are unique. A fake is a fake is a fake, he argued. That might be so, she said, but a traitor is far more dangerous than someone who's in it for the esteem. Stain's blood ran cold. Then it boiled. Failing to uphold the true virtues of heroism was one thing, but actively supporting the side of villainy. What scum? What vile, disgusting, depraved monster would so much as consider that? It's. I believe the word you're looking for is diabolical, the doctor said. Apparently he'd been so infuriated that he'd said that last part out loud. Oh well. Tell me, he growled. Tell me where they are. Point me in their direction and I'll rid the world of the vermin who dare try to slander the ideals of heroism. I'll slaughter them where they stand. I'll cut them down and leave their bodies as a warning. No, I'll show them to the world. I'll put them on display. I'll hang them up by their own entrails and all. Patience, Stain, we'll get there soon enough. No, tell me now. Tell me where. I will sedate you. Then I'll send you off to Tartarus. You won't be able to cleanse the filth from there. He bit back any more words he'd wanted to say. The chance to slay these traitors outweighed the need to voice his plans. Thank you, she said. I can tell this is deeply concerning for you. We at the Commission share your sentiment. That's why we've already taken measures to combat this threat. Is it really so hard to put a knife in their neck and get it over with? Yes, and before you say anything, the situation is far more complex than a few rogue heroes. Of course it is, he snarled. You suits have always dropped the ball. Good to know that you'll never change. Oh, but so much has indeed changed. When she spoke again, Stain hung on to every word that came from her mouth. How could he not when everything she said sounded like it had come straight from a nightmare? Thousands of people had been corrupted. Civilians, law enforcement, pro-heroes, entire corporations, and more were amongst them. This can't be happening, he thought. She's wrong. The Commission's so inept that they're seeing threats that aren't there. Or maybe she's lying. That's probably it. She's trying to get me on their side because why? Even as his brain tried to formulate an excuse, the more rational parts of his psyche had already come to a conclusion. The pros, the Commission, the entire fucking government had collectively shit the bed. An entire army, the Meta Liberation Army, lay in wait, ready to strike at a moment's notice. Yet, somehow, they thought that these new demon heroes with their big guns and power armor would be able to solve everything. He'd have to put a hold on his quest to slaughter the fakes of the world. It'd be great if he found the time to put one or two down, but there were far more pressing issues on the horizon. First, he needed to get out of this room. You need to let me go, he demanded. I have to get out there. I've already wasted too much time. Another second spent here is one they're using to strengthen themselves. You want to go and fight the entire army? By yourself? You sure as hell aren't doing anything. We have our own operatives who have been trained to deal with this exact. Even if they aren't the common trash, they're nothing more than a bunch of thugs with guns. Ready to kill, and maim, and slaughter for their next paycheck. They're brutes. They're the future. Free of everything that's led to the corruption of heroes in today's society. They have no desire for money or power, nor fame or glory. They've trained to be one thing and one thing only. The next generation of heroes. Their purpose in life is to be the protectors of the innocent. Defenders of humanity. Every last one of them was handpicked and handcrafted to become what they are now. They've undergone trials that no others could hope to survive, let alone achieve. Their very lives have been dedicated to embracing the values of a true hero. Values that All Might himself laid the groundwork for. And that's what got him. The mention of All Might. The very implication that they could possibly hold a candle to the #1 hero himself. He would have snapped at her. Hell, had she approached him before his capture, he might have contemplated taking her head off, but he had to admit. He was intrigued by what she'd claimed, especially after this newfound knowledge about bands of traitorous heroes. Actually, it all started to make sense to him now. Why hadn't he thought of doing this himself? In the face of such revolting filth, why wouldn't the Commission decide to flip the table and start from scratch? Why wouldn't they create their own heroes? Just like the doctor said, they'd be free of everything that made the old lot a bunch of failures from the start. But had they succeeded, or had they created something even worse? Was there really any guarantee that they would actually become the next generation that she promised? There was only one way to find out. What do you want from me? She regarded him in a nonchalant manner. Honestly, it won't be much different from what you were already doing. The only caveat is that you'll have partners. You'll accompany Fireteam Phoenix here as they go about searching for more turncoats and other MLA assets. Anyone they don't bag and drag, you put them down. It doesn't matter if you kill them or not, we simply need them off the playing field. We'll be able to substantially increase the number of traitors we can terminate so long as we can blame everything on you. A little extreme, don't you think? He snidely remarked. You'd let your new heroes, the ones who are supposed to uphold the ideals of All Might himself, regard a villain's very life with such dispassion? These monsters forfeited any mercy they're entitled to the moment they conspired to bring our society into ruins. Do you understand the consequences we're talking about here? Millions dead. Millions more will be affected by the fallout. And that's just here in Japan. How far do you think the suffering will reach? This isn't something we view lightly. Stain rolled it all around in his head for a few moments. Then he came to a decision. Well, in that case, when do we start? A smile. A fearsome smile materialized upon the doctor's face. Soon. My Spartans here are exemplary, but they're in dire need of new armor. Next time you see them, they'll look quite different. Chapter 16, March 5, 2168, 925 Mjolnir. What a strange name. Even more so considering that it was the name for a suit of armor rather than the mighty hammer it was based off of. However, considering that the Spartans were supposed to be living weapons in themselves, Izuku decided that particular detail could be overlooked. Besides, there was one feature above all others that the armor and mythological weapon had in common. Only the worthy may wield it, Izuku muttered under his breath. Those were the words that Dr. Halsey had said upon revealing the armor. A little grandiose, I know, Dr. Shield chuckled. But she's not wrong. In order to wear this thing, you have to be physiologically beyond anything a normal human can achieve. Most strength quirks wouldn't be able to handle this suit. Honestly, I could probably count on one hand how many people I know who can wear this thing without breaking every bone in their body. Well, there's probably more than that, but you get the idea. Is it really that dangerous? For me it just feels natural, like I was meant to wear it. Another chuckle. It takes a lot more than strength alone to use this thing. Halsey's told me a lot about your training and augmentations. The control you have over your own body is far above what the average person can manage. I'm honestly surprised that all of you have been able to adapt to it so easily. To you, it must seem more like a second skin than anything else. Izuku agreed with a hum and went back to studying his armor. It was fascinating. He could feel the liquid nanocrystal in the bodysuit moving, shifting to conform to the shape of its occupant. It was the second strangest sensation he'd ever experienced. The first, undoubtedly went to the feeling he got whenever he moved, or rather, when the armor moved. All right. Now, slowly lift your arms up to your sides, just like how we taught you, the doctor ordered. Izuku remembered their instructions. In his mind, he visualized the action of moving his arms. In response, the neural interface at the base of his skull detected these thoughts and sent the directions down to the suit. Without so much as twitching a muscle, Izuku's arms began to rise. "Whoa," he whispered. This time, Dr. Shield erupted into full-on laughter. The others had the same reaction. After a few more hearty chuckles, he got to work. He went between inspecting the armor and typing things into the datapad he held. Once satisfied, he spoke up. "Ready to take your first step?" "Of course," Izuku said with a smile. The doctor shuffled out of his way and he put all of their instructions to the test. Walking with the armor on proved to be fluid, far more so than it had any right to be. With each step he only grew more confident. "How much did you say this thing weighed, again?" Izuku asked. "A little more than 450 kilos, Dr. Shield answered. "Twice that of SPI, he realized. Yet, I feel weightless." He brought his hands up to his face and experimentally flexed them into fists a few times. Weightless, but stronger. Shield typed one more thing into his datapad. "Good, now for the final piece." Izuku walked over to the table and picked up his helmet. In his Mjolnir-clad hands, the titanium alloy headwear was as light as a feather. He turned around and inspected the thing from front to back. Unlike the rest of their armor, each Spartan had received a different helmet. Some were, in Izuku's personal opinion, quite goofy looking, whereas others were simplistic, and a couple were downright menacing. His helmet was in the second category. The air assault variant, with its sophisticated communications array and specialized optics suite, would be an absolute boon for his style. The large, triangular visor was also a welcome feature. He'd have hated to be stuck with the narrow visors of Saren's Rakan or Hitoshi's commando helmets. He didn't see how they could be so comfortable with such a narrowed field of view. Satisfied with what he saw, he slid it onto his head and heard the mechanisms lock into place. Data and programming filled his vision as the VISR software calibrated for its new user. The new VISR 4.0 operating system had been specially crafted for Mjolnir. With the benefit of their newly acquired neural interface, they could now use the system by simply thinking about it. No buttons or voice commands needed. He turned to the doctor. "How'd I look?" His eyes narrowed as he scrutinized the Spartan from head to toe. Then he gave a soft smile. "Like a hero." "Thank you, Doctor," Izuku sincerely replied. It was good to hear that despite being under almost half a metric ton of titanium armor, he could still appear heroic. "I can't begin to imagine just how much you've helped us." "You haven't seen the last of me," he sternly remarked. "Not by a long shot. Even when we'd put the finishing touches on these suits, Catherine and I couldn't help but consider everything else we could add. I've already got several ideas for the newest model. Once I'm back on our island, it's back to the fabricator for me." "A new model already? How many are there?" "What you're wearing is the Mark IV. But with all the ideas that we've been bouncing off of each other, it'll be an entirely new beast." "We're already on 4. What happened to the other 3? "Failed prototypes or models that simply didn't make the cut," he said with a wave of his hand. "They were either too bulky, didn't have a good enough power supply, or were too weak. The armor you're wearing, the Mark IV, is the first one to meet all our standards." "Huh!" Izuku exclaimed. He was honestly astonished. They'd gone through 4 entire models until they finally designed one that met their expectations. How much time had that cost them? How many resources? They really do only accept the best, Izuku thought. That's enough chit-chat for now. You're all set. Go on and meet with Dr. Halsey and the others in the testing area. I've still got several more Spartans to get suited up. Hey, and take it easy for a while, too. You still don't know just how strong you are." "I will, Doctor. And thank you for all of this." "Not a problem. You lot are the future, you know that? It's only right that we do everything we can. Now get out of here and go test out your new gear." Izuku followed the signs to the testing chamber. Upon entering, he was greeted by a cacophony of sounds. Metal clashed, treadmills hummed, scientists talked while typing away on their datapads, and even the sound of gunfire could be heard from the indoor gun range. In the middle of it all stood Dr. Halsey herself. She turned towards him. "There you are, Izuku. I hope Dr. Shield didn't bother you too much. He's always been exceptionally sociable." Izuku grinned beneath his helmet. "Not at all, Doctor. We just talked about the armor and its functions. It really wasn't any different from talking with Mei, if I'm being honest." She frowned and beckoned him over. Once close enough, she leaned in and whispered, "He didn't ask too many questions, did he?" "Don't worry, Doctor. We only talked about the suit," he assured her. She nodded her head with a sigh of relief. "Good, very good. Truth be told, I didn't need him here. My staff and I could have handled all of this. But I couldn't take the chance. No matter how unlikely the possibilities were, I couldn't risk something happening and him not being around. I won't lose any more of you. Not if I can help it." Izuku stood steadfast. He knew that the deaths of his fellow Spartans had shaken them all, but he hadn't contemplated just how much it had impacted Halsey. "It's all right, Doctor. You did what you felt was right." Although she didn't visibly react to his words, he had a feeling that it had done its job and helped to ease her mind. "Thank you for understanding, Izuku." "No worries, Doctor. So, where do you need me?" "Back to business." Halsey once more adopted a professional stance. "There's an opening on one of the treadmills over in the corner. Go ahead and start there." Izuku climbed onto the machine and followed the accompanying scientist's commands. They started off slow, going at a steady 45 kilometers per hour. He found that he could maintain this pace for hours without so much as getting winded. But in Mjolnir, that was nothing. "How fast?" Izuku cut himself off as a message displayed at the bottom of his HUD. 65.8 kph, oh, he said in surprise. He'd been told that the suit had an onboard computer linked to his neural interface, but it was only now that he understood what that meant. Any calculations he needed to run could now be done with a single thought. "Did the armor catch you off guard, too?" the scientist asked. "Yeah. It really is like something out of a comic book." He might have said it like a joke, but in his mind he couldn't help but internally gawk at what the doctors had created. What else did they have in store for the future? "There's been a lot of comments like that lately. You're almost done here, just need to get a record of your maximum speed. You can go whenever you're ready, the machine is set to match your pace." "Are you sure? Spartans are able to accelerate pretty fast." "Unless you can outmatch someone like a clock or those other speedsters, then you'll have nothing to worry about." "Well, in that case, here goes nothing." His feet hammered against the machine with each step, resonating through the air like rolling thunder, adding to the symphony of chaos amongst others. In 3 quick strides, he went from around 65 kilometers per hour to 119.1 kph. He kept it up for a few minutes until he could feel his legs beginning to burn from the exertion. He gradually descended back into an easy 45 kilometers per hour for another couple of minutes. Once done, he hopped off the treadmill and made his way towards the gun range. In an enclosed area separated from the rest of the laboratory, Izuku realized that it wasn't the Spartan who was doing the shooting. No, they were doing the exact opposite. "Are you guys sure that the surgery didn't mess up my brain in any way?" There was a round of laughter from the area from the scientists watching next to him. They stood safely behind 24 centimeters of bulletproof glass, observing the Spartan who was currently being shot at by robots. One of the scientists finally explained the situation after their initial guffaw. "This isn't a figment of your imagination, this is reality. We set this test up not long after we discovered your Spartan time ability. With our calculations, we theorized that all of you had the speed and reflexes to pull this off. So we can dodge bullets, now? This day is just one surprise after the next," Izuku thought. "I can't wait until Mei finds out about all this. She's probably gonna start drooling." "Ready to step inside?" one of them asked. "Did you even have to ask?" he countered. Once they'd deactivated the robots, Izuku was able to swap places with the other Spartan, Mawata. "You're having fun," she stated. She couldn't see his face, nor have heard him through the thick walls or the sounds of the gunfire, and her quirk had nothing to do with being an empath. But she knew. She always did. Are you? He asked. She looked at the turrets, at the bullets that had obviously missed their mark, and down towards her own set of armor. Then she faced him again and gave a small shrug. He gave a short laugh in response. They held out their arms and knocked them against each other's armored gauntlets before parting ways. When the door closed, the speakers came to life. The exercise begins in 5, 4, 3, 2. The pair of turrets came to life and immediately trained their barrels on him. His breathing remained even and controlled as he tensed his body in anticipation. 1. Their muzzles flashed in a staccato beat as a flood of pistol-caliber rounds tore through the air at supersonic speeds right towards his chest. He didn't have to worry if he'd failed. The titanium alloy plates of his Mjolnir would stop anything they shot at him. Even the weakest parts of his armor wouldn't be so much as scratched if the bullets connected. But where was the fun in that? He twisted his torso and the rounds sailed past him and impacted the titanium wall harmlessly. As the guns snapped to follow their target, Izuku lowered his center of gravity by crouching to the ground. He waited until the turrets corrected themselves and were fixed on him again. As they unleashed another wave of projectiles, he sprang from his position and leapt towards his side. The turrets rounded on him, all the while still firing. His body was a blur as he engaged in this dance between man and machine. The bullets passed all around him. They whizzed past his head, flew between his legs, and whipped uselessly through the air around his chest and arms. Not once did he come close to being struck. That's when a thought formed in his head. What does it feel like to get shot in this thing? With his mind made up, he froze and allowed several of the rounds to hit their mark. The only reasons he could tell was because of the sharp ting sound they made when they stuck and his suit subsequently warning him that he was taking fire. Though it did clarify that he wasn't taking any damage. He resumed his evasive maneuvers for another minute or two until the scientists announced that he had to move on to the next station. As he found himself back in the main room, the newest Spartan to receive their armor practically sauntered in. This is, without a doubt, the best thing ever invented, May declared. It was hard to tell her apart from all the other jet black armored figures walking around the area. The only visible difference between them was their helmets, with hers being the operator variant. You have no idea, Izuku remarked. Nah, I'm pretty sure I do, she said with a shrug. Dr. Shield and I got into a lot of the specifics of Mjolnir. Between the hydrostatic gel layer and the reactive liquid crystal, you could take a dive off of a skyscraper and still be fine. Probably tear one down, too. Did the calculations myself. With the suit's help, of course. What? He gasped. The doctor had told him that they'd be able to pull off some incredible feats, but this was starting to become insane. I wasn't joking. I'm telling you that this is the greatest thing ever created. Izuku once more studied his armor, though it was with equal parts admiration and bewilderment. After everything he'd heard and witnessed, he came to one simple conclusion. This was no costume. It wasn't meant to be a visual expression of their personalities or dazzle the public with intricate color schemes and fancy pieces. Hell, this wasn't even remotely similar to other exoskeletons like his SPI armor. It was on a whole new level of its own. Like the hunter she used to be, Tsutsumi Sensei stalked through the laboratory. She observed the Spartans from a distance, never coming close enough to warrant their attention. If Izuku had to guess, he'd say that she was sizing them up, evaluating them for a mission. Odd, but not unusual. After all, it was her that had made the final decision on who would be assigned to the assault group during Operation Nightcrawler. She'd done the exact same thing while the Spartans had been recovering from their augmentations. She'd scoped them out from the sidelines, seeing how they'd been adapting to their bodies and the loss of their comrades. If the same thing was happening again, if she was here to assess them while they got used to their armor, then that meant there was another big operation in the works. After 15 minutes, it had seemed that she'd come to a decision. She silently made her way towards Chimera's team leader, Saren, and said something. Then she went to Legacy's leader, Keiichi. Finally, she came to him. Izuku, gather your teammates and follow me. Yes, ma'am, he dutifully replied. He went around the room, collected his friends, and hurried off after her. They walked in silence for several minutes until they entered a large briefing room. Tsutsumi-sensei fired up the hollow projector and faced them. Spartans, I've selected you for this mission because of your unique skill sets and your history. She pointed to the first slew of images that formed. They detailed a large compound that looked like a combination between office buildings and a mansion. Large, imposing walls surrounded the area, but the pictures had been taken from a vantage point so they could easily see past them. Is the headquarters of the Yakuza group known as the Shi Hasaikai. The images you see here are courtesy of Fireteam Chimera's investigation. Through their efforts, we've been able to learn a great deal of information regarding the layout of their base, their command structure, size of their forces, and their arsenal. Izuku was aware of the Shi Hasaikai. The Commission had been keeping a close eye on them with an ever-increasing amount of interest. As a result, so had the Spartans. Tsutsumi-sensei went through the important details. The layout of the compound, enemy resistance, and high-value targets, HVTs. Then she threw something completely unexpected at them. Mythic Team. The things you've accomplished are impressive, don't get me wrong. But there was, ultimately, another reason why I selected you for this mission. Your experience working alongside other pro-heroes. Realization dawned among the Spartans. Ma'am? Keiichi asked. Are you saying? That's right, fireteams. This will be a joint operation between us, the police, and a number of pro-hero agencies. Sounds like we're really going all out, said Will. And for good reason, she sighed. This particular group of Yakuza have proven to be far more dangerous than any others in the past. Not to mention that the local agencies and law enforcement already have been running their own investigations into the group. Because of this, the board's come to a decision. This operation will mark the debut of the Spartans. This is it, Izuku thought. We're finally revealing ourselves to the world. And with quite the show, too. It won't be as in-depth as other pro-hero debuts, though we'll get into the specifics at the end of this briefing. Speaking of which, you'll have another briefing here in a week that will include the pros and the police. It'll be of far less significance than what we'll be going over today. In fact, the things we'll be discussing are not, under any circumstances, to be shared with the other groups. Izuku shared a look with Hitoshi. This was proving to be a very interesting day. In light of new information discovered after we decided to work alongside them, you'll find that you have conflicting objectives. Chapter 17, March 8, 2168-850. I could have saved her, Mirio whispered. Kid, you have to pull yourself out of this. I know it hurts, believe me, I do. But the truth is that you made the right call. Eraserhead was trying to reassure him as they walked down the hallway towards the conference room, though nothing he'd said so far had lifted the young intern's spirits. You had no idea what he was capable of, and you were in a dense urban area. One wrong move and you would have been crippled, or worse. With everything we know about Shisaki, it'd most certainly be worse, Sir Night-Eye stated. But I have the perfect quirk to deal with him, Mirio argued. He'd never have been able to touch me, I know it, I could have taken him. I didn't know you shared Night-Eye's ability to see into the future, Eraserhead quipped. No, of course I can't. Then how do you know you could have taken him? Because he wouldn't have been able to touch me. And, what? That's it? You think that once he figured that out he would have just given up? Well, no, but I could have at least gotten Eri out of there. We all know that Shisaki would have never allowed that, Sir Night-Eye chimed in. Even if he couldn't harm you, and I don't fully agree with that assumption, there were plenty of other people around that he surely would have taken as hostage. Mirio wanted to retort. He wanted to say that he'd never allow such a thing to happen, but he knew the truth. He knew his own limits. If he started a brawl right in the middle of that street, then people might have died. No, scratch that. People definitely would have died. Yet, how could he admit that leaving a child at the mercy of that monster was the best possible decision? I know what you're thinking. Eraserhead's words cut through his thoughts. How could I have left her? What kind of hero abandons someone who's so obviously in need of help? Here's the answer. You haven't abandoned her. Mirio's eyes widened in shock. What was he talking about? She was right there, literally begging him to save her. And he just let that madman take her without a fight. He saw the bandages all along her arms. He knew that she was being abused. Where are we going right now? The intern raised an eyebrow at that. To the meeting room. A meeting for what? To discuss how to raid the Shi-Hasaikai base. Why? Mirio didn't have a clue as to where this was going, but he knew that Eraserhead had some sort of point he was trying to make, so he decided to go along with it. So that we can stop Overhaul and the rest of the Yakuza. What else? To save Eri. That's right. You got out alive. You got out of there with everyone still alive. Then you came straight to us and told us what happened. Now we're going in there to save Eri. And this way, the odds are in our favor. So you haven't abandoned her, Mirio. Instead, you brought the cavalry. He didn't say a word. Not yet, at least. He let those words wash over him and bring him the solace he so desperately needed. Just hang in there, Eri, he silently pleaded, the cavalry is coming. The three of them walked in silence for a while longer before Mirio felt comfortable talking again. Speaking of the cavalry, what are they like? Huh? Which ones? Aizawa asked. The Spartans, of course. What makes you think I've met them? Sir Night-Eye told me. The glare that Aizawa sent towards his mentor could have frozen the entire student populace, and quite a few teachers. At UA solid out of fear. But Sir Night-Eye took it in stride. There wasn't so much as a twitch of a muscle to show whether he was bothered by it. I didn't see any harm in telling him. Despite his exuberant nature, Mirio's quite good at keeping a secret. I'm pretty sure I explained in excruciating detail to you that I didn't want any of my students finding out about that. And none of them will. I beg to differ. Don't worry, Aizawa-sensei, I haven't told anyone else. Eraserhead didn't deign to answer his attempts to ease his worries, he simply grumbled his resentment. Are they the reason you're here? Did they ask you to come? Mirio asked. No, it's like I said, I'm here to watch out for you three. You, Najire, and Tamaki might be third years in a month, but these Shi-Hasaikai villains aren't your average thugs. They're organized, they're well-funded, and every last one of them is probably just itching for a reason to murder you. There might be a lot of pros teaming up for this raid, but Principal Nezu and I believe that it'd be best if there were an extra pair of eyes watching out for you. Thanks, Eraserhead. I'm sure the others will be glad to know that you're here watching out for us. That's not an excuse to go and get sloppy. I won't always be there to act as a safety net. Don't worry, we'll be on our toes the entire time. Good. As reassuring as that was, I do believe you've been avoiding his question, Sir Night-Eye quipped. Gah, fine, I'll tell you a little bit about them, but only because it directly relates to the mission. Thank you, sir. Mirio beamed. Right, sure, Aizawa mumbled. Anyway, I've only met a few of them, and even then, we didn't talk much. I bet that's more than any other pro can say. Indeed, said Sir Night-Eye. Even when I was planning this meeting, I never directly spoke with them. It was always through various commission personnel. Aizawa shrugged. Hawks seems to get along with them pretty well. Wait, Hawks? Asked Mirio. You mean the wing hero? The guy who doesn't even wait around for his own sidekicks? That is, indeed, who I said. Interesting, mused Sir Night-Eye. I suppose it shouldn't be too surprising. They're both under the employ of the commission, after all. Are they anything like Hawks? Mirio tentatively asked. I mean, I've never met the guy, but he seems to be pretty outgoing and social. The Spartans, well, aren't. At least, that's how the rumors make them out to be. Don't let that persona of his fool you. They've got more in common than you'd think. Eraserhead insisted. They move fast, they hit hard, and more than anything they're effective. Honestly, the only difference between them is probably the fact that Hawks has to look good for the public. That's quite the conclusion you've come to, Sir Night-Eye murmured. I don't hear you disagreeing, because I'm not. What makes you think that, sir? Mirio asked. I thought you'd never met him before. I haven't. However, I do know Eraserhead and he's quite adept at reading people. Whoa, I didn't realize that. Are you sure it's safe to have them here then? Eraserhead's face scrunched up in confusion. What? No, that's not what. Look, I didn't mean to make them sound like a bunch of psychos. I've worked alongside them. Both the Spartans and Hawks. I believe they're good people. They're just dedicated, I guess. Don't expect them to slow down for you. Mirio felt invigorated upon hearing that. If anything, they're the ones that are gonna have to keep up. Eraserhead gave a small but didn't respond further. So how many are teaming up with us? Sir Night Eye answered this time. From what the commissions told me, there'll be 3 teams joining us. 12 Spartans in total. They're known as Fireteams Mythic, Legacy, and Chimera. Any of them ring a bell? Eraserhead? Yeah, he sighed. Mythic Team's the one I've gone on patrol with. I don't know the others, though. Awesome. I know you think they probably won't care, but maybe they'll appreciate having a familiar face around. I suppose they might. So, who are they? What do you mean? Well, what's their hero names? Mythic 1, 2, 3, and 4. I think I understand what you're talking about now. March 8, 2168 8:55. As soon as the commission got involved, Ryukyu knew that something serious was going on. That's not to say that everything the commission sinks their claws into is a big deal, but reaching out to a large coalition of heroes after months of utmost secrecy was certainly a red flag. It wasn't hard to guess why either. Just across the large meeting room stood the demons of the commission themselves, though she'd now been informed that they were known as Spartans. There hadn't been much interaction between them and the other pro-heroes who were present. They'd been content to stay on one side of the room and no one had seen a reason to change that yet. They moved around occasionally but wouldn't say anything. So far, their representative had been doing all of the talking. Since there was still some time before the meeting officially started, all of the pros were still mingling about. Their silent colleagues quickly became the topic of their conversations. They seem, Fat Gum struggled to find a suitable word, reserved. I don't know. If anything, I think awkward would be a better way to describe them, Najire-chan said thoughtfully. She tilted her head to the side as she looked over at them again. Then she gave a beaming smile while waving her hand ecstatically. They didn't react at first. Then, the largest of them brought their right hand up. They waved once, put their arm back down, and immediately went back to imitating a statue. The only difference now was that every single one of the Spartans were staring directly at their group. They were ramrod straight, standing in the exact same pose, and were so still that Ryukyu started to wonder if they were even breathing. Where the hell did they find these guys? She wondered. Najire-chan wasn't nearly as put off as the rest of the pros were. Instead, she went back to the conversation like nothing happened. To her side, Ryukyu could hear a mumble. She didn't catch any words, but she knew for certain that they said something. What did you say, Senator? They might, he trailed off into another mutter. Ryukyu couldn't help but give a small smile at the young man's timid nature. Fat Gum asked him to repeat himself once more. They might just be nervous being around so many new people, he finally said at a reasonable volume. It's always hard for me whenever I have to meet someone new. I've tried hard to overcome it. Mirio's helping me out, though there hasn't been much success. Half the time I end up scaring them off before I have a chance to say a single word. Right now, they're surrounded by dozens of strangers. Ryukyu regarded the Spartans once more. She took in their appearance to the fullest. Between the large, bulky, jet-black armor to the rigid posture and unwavering discipline, she was having a hard time coming to the same conclusion, though she didn't completely write it off. She'd encountered numerous pros over her years with similar personality traits. That's certainly something we should consider. I don't know, it's a lot more reasonable than what some of the others have been saying, Fat Gum countered. Oh, yeah, he chuckled. He continued in a whisper, I've heard some people say that they're not even humans, that they're actually robots that have been programmed by hyper-advanced AI. There's also some that totally believe the whole supernatural aspect to them. They think that the commission found a book that summoned demons and forced them to do their bidding. That's nothing, Rocklock scoffed. One guy the first met swore up and down that they're all clones of All Might. Nijire-chan let out a comical snort and Ryukyu couldn't blame her. With hardly any information to go off of, everyone had started putting forth their own thoughts on the mysterious newcomers. Some were well within the realm of possibility while others obviously let their imaginations run wild. She decided to put in her own idea. Honestly, the most likely scenario is that they're just a bunch of young and upcoming heroes who the Commission wanted to cash in on. If even a fraction of what we've heard is true, then it's obvious they have potential. After all, it's pretty much the exact same thing they did with Hawks. Yeah, sure, that's the most realistic option. Fat Gum smiled, but it just doesn't have the same ring to it as All Might clones. Ryukyu chuckled at that, but before she could make a joke, she was cut off by a commotion on the far end of the conference area. "Attention, everyone," a voice called out. The speaker turned out to be none other than Sir Night-Eye, the head of this team-up. He and his intern, Lemillion, had entered the room from the large wooden doors along with Eraserhead at their rear, though he veered off to a different part of the room than them. The underground hero surprised her small group when he took a spot right next to the Spartans and exchanged greetings with them. It wasn't his actions that stunned them but the level of comfortability the Spartans displayed towards him. They didn't have long to gawk at the interaction as Sir Night-Eye quickly got them back on track. "Now that we're all here, I think it's time we begin. Please, take your seats." Sir Night-Eye continued after everyone settled in. "Let me start this meeting by first thanking everyone present. I expected this operation would require a significant amount of support, but this turnout is nothing short of impressive. I'd like to thank each agency for their contribution too." Throughout the pleasantries, Ryukyu kept glancing over to the Spartans in an attempt to find anything, no matter how small, that might give her some insight into who they are. It wasn't like there was anything important being discussed at the moment anyway. But the longer the Dragoon hero examined her new colleagues, the more irate she grew. There was hardly anything for her to go off of. Their armor covered the entirety of their bodies and was so bulky that she could hardly tell a difference between any of them. At least their helmets were different. Their demeanor was obviously drilled into them through training, but that didn't give her any clue as to what that training was or where they'd received it. Right now, all she had to offer was rumors. Rumors in. "I'd like to give an especially warm welcome to our newest allies over at the Commission, the Spartans," said Sir Night-Eye. The mention of the mysterious heroes had snapped Ryukyu out of her thoughts soon enough for her to listen to their newest accomplishment. "The intelligence they've acquired on the Shi-Hasaikai has been instrumental to our planning. Through their efforts, we've been able to determine the number of villains present, their quirks, and have even gotten eyes and ears within their compound." "Impressive," Fat Gum murmured. Ryukyu was in agreement with her friend as images of the compound appeared on the massive screen in front of them. The angles and clarity of the pictures made it evident just how far the Spartans had been able to get into the area. "These pictures, they're actually from within the Yakuza's base," Ryukyu stated incredulously. She looked at the Spartans, desperately trying to pierce through their stoic nature. "How do you do that?" Instead of any of the armored giants answering her, it was the woman sitting next to them who shifted in her seat before speaking. "Spartans undergo a rigorous training regimen that includes a variety of fields like combat, first aid, and infiltration. The members of the Shi-Hasaikai are powerful, but ultimately lacking in comparison." One of the heroes, Rocklock, let out an amused harumph at that. "It's good to have some fire, but don't get cocky. Underestimating an opponent can come back to bite you in the ass real quickly." The lady merely nodded her head in agreement. "I understand that the presence of the Spartans is an intriguing one, but I ask that we remain focused," said Sir Night-Eye. "I assure you all that there will be time to get to know one another. Trust and cooperation are instrumental for any team up, after all." Ryukyu perked up at that. Good, she thought. Today is most certainly about the Yakuza. But I have to admit I'd be a little disappointed if I didn't learn anything about the new kids on the block. The meeting became straightforward after that. Between the Spartans, Sir Night-Eye, and what several other pros were able to discover, there was plenty of information to discuss. They started off with the villains. Who they were and what their quirks were. They're called the 8 Bullets. They're Chisaki's, or Overhaul's, top lieutenants. Every one of them is a formidable fighter, however, with the right strategies they can be brought down swiftly enough. Apart from them is the general manager of the Shi Hasaikai, Joy Irinaka, otherwise known as Mimic. There's also Overhaul's chief assistant, Hari Kurono, dubbed Chronostasis, including Overhaul himself. These 11 individuals make up the Shi Hasaikai's leadership. Use caution when facing any of them. Even on their own, they can prove to be extremely dangerous. How do we take them down? Asked Fat Gum. They'll have the home field advantage, so to speak. A voice, young, but undeniably resolute, rang out. It took Ryukyu a moment to realize where it was coming from. If all goes to plan, we'll take them by surprise, said one of the Spartans, the leader, by the looks of it. We want to prevent a long, drawn-out fight. The leader of Mythic Team is correct, Sir Night-Eye followed up. This actually leads us to the next part of the discussion. The layout of the Shi Hasaikai's base. Mythic Team? Ryukyu wondered. I thought this was all of them. Just how many Spartans are there? She shook herself from her thoughts quickly. The time for questions would come soon enough, but right now she had to keep her mind focused on the mission. It wasn't a moment too soon, either, as Sir Night-Eye addressed a captivating subject. Had already assumed that there was some sort of tunnel system they'd been utilizing in order to ferry their people and supplies. Their base of operations is, after all, practically dead center of a populated urban area, so they'd need some method of transportation that wouldn't raise suspicion. And what tunnels they were! From the rudimentary map they had on display, the only word that came to her mind was labyrinth. If the scale was to be believed, then they must have gone on for dozens of kilometers underneath the city. We aren't sure how accurate most of these dimensions are. Every piece of information regarding these subterranean passageways were acquired through preliminary scouting, highly sophisticated sensors, and by using my quirk to look through the future of one of the Yakuza members. However, we have accumulated enough to create a plan we're confident in. With that, the bespectacled man gave a respectful nod towards the HPSC woman who stood up. Good morning, everyone. My name is Vanzina Maximova, though you may refer to me by my call sign, Control. The plan is a simple one. The Spartans will infiltrate the Yakuza stronghold by entering through one of the underground tunnels. From there, they will split up to accomplish their individual tasks. Fireteams Mythic and Legacy will neutralize and apprehend the Shi Hasaikai leadership as they come across them, effectively cutting the head off of the snake. Fireteam Chimera, on the other hand, will break off from the rest of the group to search for any and all innocents that are in the base. Innocents? Ryukyu blurted out. She'd meant to wait until the end before asking any questions, but this new piece of information sent a chill down her spine. What poor souls were trapped in the hands of these villains? Vanzina, or Control, as she'd titled herself, gave an apprehensive sigh. She tapped something into the datapad in front of her and Ryukyu felt a lead weight drop into her stomach at what she saw. The image of a little girl, certainly no more than a few years old, was brought before all of them. The high-quality picture captured every horrifying detail about her situation. From the tattered rags she wore to the plethora of bandages adorning her body to the look of abject terror on her face, it was all there for them to view. Her name is Eri, Vanzina began, and that's all we've been able to verify regarding her identity. Facial scans have yielded nothing and we haven't found anyone resembling her in the database, nor has any hospital we've visited recognized her. We believe she might be related to Chisaki, but that still hasn't been confirmed. What we do know is that she's important to his operation. Sir Night-Eye chimed in at that point, explaining Chisaki's quirk and how it was likely being used to do unspeakable things to the young girl, but Ryukyu was already somewhere else. The moment she spotted the child with all her bandages and wounds and the fear etched into her face, she was reminded of a time years ago. Ryukyu felt it coming back to her, everything about that day. The coppery taste of blood in her mouth, the stinging pain of punches crashing against her face, the sounds of concrete crumbling, the screams of civilians as they realized too late that they were too close to the battle. Then it was the way her claws scraped against the debris, trying frantically to save those that had been buried beneath and finally coming across one. That one. The one who'd nearly broken her. The one who nearly caused her to quit her hero career because she couldn't stand the fact that she'd failed such a young soul. Izuku. Ma'am? The Spartan, mythic leader, she thought it was, called out to her. Are you all right? She realized then that the rest of the table had gone silent and looked to her with varying levels of concern. She must have caused a bit of a scene with her damned flashback. What the fuck am I supposed to say? She thought sardonically. Oh, yeah, it's all cool. The little girl who's being tortured by her possible father made me remember that time I let a fucking child die on my watch and I've never fully gotten past that. She went to say she was fine but realized that absolutely nobody would believe her. Instead, she shifted the conversation towards something far more important in her eyes. We need to save Eri. The others slowly nodded their agreement, but it was Mythic Leader who spoke out loud. We'll get it done, ma'am. Leave it to us. Why you? Moments before, the room had been silent out of concern, but now the silence was one of tension. Ma'am, I don't doubt your training, Spartans, but I am concerned about your experience. How many hostage situations have you been in? How many rescues have you performed? Vanzina put her hands forward in a placating gesture. Ryukyu, you have nothing to fear. These Spartans are uniquely trained and highly qualified for extreme situations just like this one. There isn't a doubt in my mind that they. Vanzina control whichever one you prefer. I say this with absolute respect for both you and your Spartans. I disagree with you. Neither Mythic Leader nor any of the other Spartans reacted to what she'd said, but Vanzina's displeasure was worryingly evident. I mean to say, there are a dozen pros, in this very room, right now, who are just as, if not more than capable of guaranteeing Eri's safety. A couple of seats over, Fat Gum decided to speak his mind too. I didn't want to say anything until afterwards, but Ryukyu does have a point. The rest of us have several years of hero work under our belts, but you guys have, what, a couple of months? I'm not trying to down-talk all of you. I just want to get the point across. Maybe someone else should go. Or, better yet, why don't we all go with you through the tunnels, or at least a few more of us? Vanzina closed her eyes for a moment, most likely to collect herself. In the span of a split second, she went from glowering to the very definition of serene. As I said before, Spartans are uniquely trained in matters of stealth. They've infiltrated numerous compounds before, this very Yakuza base being one of them, and every single time they've never failed to complete their mission. And as for your suggestion, I don't see any merit to it. A larger group would only increase the chances of you being discovered. A dozen Spartans is already a sizable team as is. Before we get too off track, said Najire, maybe we can talk about what you did have in mind for the rest of us. There's a lot of villains in that base and I don't imagine you wanted to fight all of them by yourselves. Of course. Vanzina nodded sagely. Once the 8 bullets and other forms of leadership have been dealt with, rank and file members will still need to be apprehended. We don't anticipate that they're going to surrender. In fact, they'll more than likely move inwards in search of their commanders. That's where all of you will come in. You'll assault the front gate and keep them focused on what's going on above ground. From there, you'll push further into the base, crushing them between you and the Spartans. A large contingent of police officers will accompany you, both to provide support and to quickly ferry the villains to the nearest station. Ryukyu found herself agreeing with what she heard. It was a sound enough plan. There was no arguing that, though she'd learned early on in her career to expect the worst out of these situations. Any battle could turn rotten in the blink of an eye. What if their leaders can't be taken down fast enough? She asked. What if the Spartans become overwhelmed and we can't make it to them in time? What if Eri's condition is serious and she can't wait for us to clear out the base? A light scowl materialized upon Vanzina's face, but it didn't appear to be directed at her. She seemed to be contemplating her words instead. Sir Night-Eye cleared his throat. No plan survives contact with the enemy. It's a tried and true saying. We have come up with a contingency plan in the event that some of the things you suggested happen. Mythic Leader leaned forward and spoke to her in that calm, determined tone of his. Should something arise, we will retreat back to the tunnels. At full speed, we'll be able to make the trip back towards the surface in a few minutes. Even with Eri among us. Once we've made it far enough, we'll seal the passageways behind us by using remote explosives. This will prevent both anyone from chasing us and the Yakuza members the chance to flee. It was a bit more chaotic than Ryukyu would have preferred, especially so given that they'd have a child among them. But she could understand the necessity for such measures. The villains had both the numbers and the quirks. In order for the Spartans to counter such a threat, they'd have to do something to make sure that the Yakuza wouldn't be able to easily pursue them. It's an acceptable backup plan, she relented. The pros around her all voiced their agreement. In the wake of finding common ground, a tentative peace had settled amongst the room, which had allowed them all to breathe a little easier. Ryukyu didn't find any pleasure in shattering it so soon. But I still insist on discussing our assignments in this team-up. Across the table, Vanzina had no outward reaction to her words. However, the steely look in her eyes couldn't possibly be mistaken for warmth. It was obvious that she wasn't willing to budge in the slightest. I understand your concerns regarding the well-being of Eri, and you should know that we are in no way brushing you off. However, our course of action has already been decided. Every part of this operation has been meticulously crafted to best serve and accomplish our goals. Ryukyu felt the slightest twitch in her left eye, and what, exactly, would those goals be? Eliminating the Hasaikai and rescuing Eri are still at the forefront of our minds, though this raid does provide the Commission with a rare opportunity. Oh, as you've already gathered, this mission will receive quite the attention from both the public and the rest of the pro-hero community. It's under these unique circumstances that the Commission wishes to officially debut the Spartans. That way, they can establish a positive relationship with the masses as well as form contacts with the top hero agencies, such as yourselves. Once she was done speaking, Vanzina allowed the room a moment to process this information. Ryukyu had certainly processed it. And she didn't like it. March 8, 2168 9:18. Are you fucking with me right now? What I think she meant to say was, one of the interns tried to interject, but was swiftly cut off. That is what I meant to say, the Dragoon hero all but snarled. There's a child in there who's being tortured, and yet you have the gall to sit here and discuss using this situation to advance your secret hero's agendas? Ryukyu may have been the one voicing her displeasure, or more accurately her disgust, towards the members of the Commission, though the expressions of the many pros around her made it clear that they were firmly in agreement. Miss, I believe you've been mistaken, Vanzina said coolly. I told you in no uncertain terms already that these matters are a secondary goal for us. Our priorities remain the same: rescue Eri and stop the Hasaikai. There shouldn't even be a secondary goal in all this. Our only concern should be guaranteeing Eri's safety. This isn't going well, Izuku pondered glumly. He knew why they couldn't allow anyone to change the plan. Rescuing Eri and destroying the Hasaikai were their priorities, yes, but those weren't their only objectives within the base. Control's insistence that this was their chance for a proper debut was nothing more than a fabrication. The Spartans couldn't have cared less for such a tradition. Instead, the reason why it had to be them, and only them, to infiltrate the Yakuza compound was so they could secure everything they had on the quirk-erasing bullets without being discovered. In a way, Izuku agreed with Ryukyu. Even before all the training, he had a simple yet rigid mentality towards life. If someone needed help, he would help them. Right now, Eri was most certainly in need of help. It took every ounce of his self-control to not argue with Tsutsumi-sensei when she told them of their ulterior motives for going on this raid days ago. He wanted to tell her that saving people wasn't just an objective for them, it was the very purpose of the Spartans to do so. But he stayed his tongue, and in the end, she gave them a reason to accept this new part of their mission. It's not enough to save those in front of us, he remembered her saying. We have to plan for the future, for when the MLA finally strikes. We need every advantage that we can get our hands on, and those quirk-erasing bullets are one of them. So here they were, in the present, with their whole meticulously crafted plan falling apart before it even began. The other pros were already beginning to look at him and his Spartans with skepticism. Some actually had expressions of scorn. If the situation deteriorated anymore, then this team up would fall apart before it even began. He couldn't allow that. Not with Ares' life on the line. No matter what anyone would say, the Spartans' first and only concern would always be the protection of the innocent. The best way to ensure Ares' safety was to descend upon the base with the full might of all the pros in this room. They needed everyone here working together without hesitation, without any sort of tension between them. But the whole thing had already gotten so out of hand. How was he supposed to bring everyone together again? What could he do? What could he say that would unite them? Perhaps merely reminding them that the life of a child being on the line would bring them back to a more cooperative state of mind. If there was one thing that could rally any group of pros, it was always the mention of people in danger. An idea began to form within Izuku's mind. One that would certainly put him in hot water with the commission. Though with the way things were going right now, he knew he'd have to do something drastic. First, he needed to get the pros to hear him out. "I've wanted to be a pro hero for as long as I can remember," Izuku stated. Then he motioned to the other Spartans around him. "We all have." He paused for a moment to get a read on the room. Just as he'd hoped, the arguing had stopped and now all eyes were on him now. Even those of his fellow teammates. Satisfied with this small bit of progress, he continued on. "I know those words might not seem that significant. Millions, tens of millions of people all across the world have likely said those exact words. The only difference between us and them is that the Commission saw to put their faith in us. Our armor, our gear, and our training. All of it is the best that can be offered. All that we can ask for now is for you to put your faith in us." Once more, he allowed a few short seconds between his speech so that everyone could digest what he'd said. He'd certainly given them food for thought if their faces were anything to go off of. Between the smiles and the scowls, it was easy to tell who was starting to warm up to them and who would still need a bit more convincing. Here comes the kicker. He cleared his throat and began again. "That being said, I believe that we could come to a compromise." Out of the corner of his eye, Izuku could see Control's eyes widen in shock. He'd have to apologize to her later for this, but it still needed to be done. Us Spartans will still infiltrate the base as planned. That much is non-negotiable. However, it wouldn't be too problematic if another pro accompanied us. One who's skilled in covert operations such as this one. Someone who is unquestionably experienced in their line of work and has an outstanding reputation among the pro-hero community. And, as a bonus, is also familiar with the Spartans. In contrast to the incensed expression of Control, the vast majority of pro-heroes nodded in favor of what he was saying. Ryukyu was the one who asked the golden question. "Who are you thinking?" The very person Izuku had in mind turned to glare at him. "That's not why I'm here. Eraserhead." Well, I hope everyone liked the story, and please share or leave a like and a blue heart in the comments or subscribe to see that you guys like the story, and I'll see you all on the next one.